Chapter 1. Rhett thought, when he became the king of Agyra, his island country in the Mediterranean Sea, that he would lose some of his close friendships, that he would miss out on anything casual and relaxed, and worst of all, that he would have to give up his place on the world-renowned water ski championship team. As he spun the ski boat around to pick up his friend Clint, he smiled. He had stubbornly clung for so long to the water ski team that his assistant finally gave in and scheduled time for him to be out on the water with the team. The boat did a full circle, and as he got close to Clint, he called out, "Did you get a good drink?" "Very funny." Clint shook his head, flinging drops of water all around him. "I only missed that last one. I gotta go again." "Dude, we're late." Today, he had a meeting to work on his relationship with the princes. They were probably all arriving at his boathouse that very moment. "Not yet. Come on, I can't end like this." Clint reached for the ski rope's handle and maneuvered the slalom ski out in front of his body. Once he was in the ready position, he yelled, "One more!" Rhett gunned the boat faster than he should to take up the slack. "Whoa, whoa!" Clint's shouts made Rhett laugh as Clint burst up out of the water, spraying droplets all around him. "Yee-haw!" Rhett rolled his eyes. The man thought he was an American cowboy. "He makes our whole team look good." Enzo, another prince of the island countries, grinned. "I think we're gonna win this year." "We would if Mountain Blue wasn't coming." "Is that Emily?" "We can take them." Rhett didn't say anything, but he knew it was next to impossible to beat Emily or her brothers in anything to do with the water. "I'm gonna drive Clint in towards the dock." "What time are we meeting the guys?" "They should be there already, upstairs." "Are all the princes coming?" "Yeah, the Valdezes will be late." They straightened out so that Clint could take the course one more time. They'd moved the buoys to be competition standard, and they were having a hard time hitting all of them. Their team was composed of a rotation of princes who wanted to participate. Their lives were busy, but they always tried to make sure they had a powerhouse group of 5 ready to compete. Rhett told himself that's why he was edgy, not because Emily was coming. "Hey, remember when Emily finished this course?" Enzo laughed. Rhett grunted. "How old were we? 10? She did not finish the course when we were 10. It was more like 15. How was Rhett going to handle being with Emily if he couldn't deal with having a conversation about her? "No, dude, you guys were already snogging when she was 15. Maybe not 10, 12. Do we have to talk about this?" "I'm just saying, she did it young. We have to beat her." The boat sped up. "Why is she coming anyway?" "Vacation?" "I don't know. We don't talk anymore." "Is she fair game?" Rhett's scowl silenced Enzo. "Okay, point taken. You need to lighten up." He exhaled slowly. "I know. I'll be better in a few minutes." They pulled in close to the dock, turning so that Clint could ski his way in. He plowed in, shooting up spray as he turned. Then he hopped up out of his ski as he jumped up onto the dock. Their dock hands scooped up the ski, and Rhett sidled the boat up against the dock. As if on cue, the music cranked up. He held his hands in the air. "Let's get this party started!" He ran into the boathouse and up the stairs, pushing open the door to his upstairs rec room. "Gentlemen, let the first meeting of the Prince Society begin." Everyone had come, as expected. There were 8 guys scattered around the room, playing pool or video games. Watching them all brought a rush of nostalgia for the days when all they thought about was girls and water skiing. The princes raised their cue sticks, drinks, or game controllers to him in greeting. No one sat at the large conference table, each place set with pens and an agenda. Rhett groaned. "They look like a bunch of teenagers." Clint stepped in, rubbing a towel through his hair. "Hey, this was our pad. They're just reliving the memes." "I guess so." Rhett made his way to the fridge and grabbed a soda before calling on the intercom to his assistant. "Jeff, we're ready for dinner." Enzo was right. He did need to lighten up. Rhett tried to relax, but having this group here in his boathouse, it just felt empty without Emily. And he knew that wasn't happening anytime soon. He'd heard about Emily's divorce, and just knowing she was unattached did crazy things to his insides. Dinner arrived. The staff set it up in the other room on the huge, thick wood table, and the guys dug in. Rhett studied them. They represented a large amount of the royalty, whose countries bordered the Mediterranean. Brooks, Enzo, Clint, Donovan, Zane, Dexter, Arlo, Ryland. Once everyone was settled at the table, Rhett started. Okay, let's talk. As you all know, we called you here to start the Prince Society. Yeah, so what is that exactly? Brooks, the Prince of Rhodes, took a bite of his sandwich. Of all the guys, Rhett hoped he would jump on board. The other guys liked him. A lot of things. First, every Mediterranean prince is included, and that's important. We're united on this. For the ladies. Donovan high-fived the guys near him, and pretty much every face at the table smirked. Rhett laughed. The society will have its benefits, like when we have our parties, events, and this water ski competition. But it will also serve a greater purpose, for us to come together on issues and problems that face our united Mediterranean community. Some of us don't worry about all that. Arlo and Donovan laughed, and Rhett resisted rolling his eyes. Yeah, we're not unlucky enough to be the heir, Arlo razzed Zane, who was the heir to a large throne. Rhett wanted their attention back. We're asking you to start caring. In between the parties, we're asking that you step up a little. There's a lot we can do together. He could tell he was losing them. He's right. We stand behind Rhett. Nico Valdez, King of Torin, stood in the doorway, his huge frame filling the space. His 5 brothers crowded in behind him. They were a commanding presence, and Rhett smiled in gratitude. Nico winked at him. The truth is, there's a lot going on in our sea that affects all of us, Nico continued. The room fell into a respectful silence. The Valdez brothers often did that to people, but they knew how to party like the best of them. Come in, take your seats at the table and dig in. Rhett was glad they'd come when they did. He was happy all of them made it. Clint lifted a glass. On to more important topics, like who's in the boat for the competition and who's skiing. Donovan ran a hand through his hair. I should definitely be in the boat. For the publicity shots, everyone groaned. They all kind of wanted to toss him into the sea, but he had his moments, so they kept him around. That and his father commanded a huge portion of the Mediterranean's wealth in trade. 2 in the boat, 3 in the competition. Brooks looked around the table. We gotta talk about our team. Rhett says Mountain Blue is competing this year. We are not losing to those guys again. I don't care if Emily is on the team. Clint leaned back in his chair. Dude, is she competing or not? Everyone looked at Rhett. I don't know. We don't talk. This topic was going to get real old real fast. He wished everyone would back off the Emily vibe. As for who'll be in the competition, we're gonna hold tryouts just like we have every year. Starting Tuesday, best team goes. The rest of us will be there to support and participate in the first Prince's Gala. He pointed 2 fingers at Donovan. This is where we bring the ladies. Even you? Donovan snorted. Clint raised his eyebrows. Yeah, is the Bachelor King bringing a date? Rhett ignored them. He might bring a date, if he felt like dealing with the public speculation. They all seemed satisfied with the plans. Everyone dug back into their food and talked mostly to the people near them. When everything was wrapping up, Nico and Tripp came to stand beside him, his 2 favorite Valdez brothers. Hey, thanks. Good timing today. Some of those guys just need to grow up. In the meantime, we'll keep them in line. This was a great idea, Rhett. Good things will come of it. I hope so. I know we need to talk about hosting another environmental summit, and we should also start discussing unrest in our southern nations. But I thought for today, girls, water skiing and food would be enough. Nico clapped him on the back. It was perfect. He sipped his drink. So, Emily? Rhett groaned. Why does she keep coming up? We haven't talked, not one word, since our dumb breakup. The dangerous duo back together. Heaven help us, Tripp teased. Very funny, but really, we're adults. We should be able to talk, say hello. They nodded, overly agreeable, and Rhett regretted the whole conversation. He didn't want anyone in his business, not even his friends. Okay, okay, we agree. Talk to the woman. Make peace. We miss her brothers. Trip and Nico clinked their glasses together. Clint joined the three of them. But we can't let them win the competition. That's not happening. I want that trophy right there, where it belongs. Rhett pointed to an empty shelf in his main room. Done. We win. We make nice. We party with our friends. Sound good? Trip's smile could charm the most antagonistic among them. Wish it was that easy. Rhett shook his head. Nico shrugged. You never know, it might be. The other princes started to get up and trickle out. They'd be back first thing in the morning to practice. But Rhett didn't want them to leave yet. He'd be left with a silent house, and he knew what thoughts would fill his mind. Chapter 2. Emily kissed her daughter on the forehead. I won't be gone for very long. I'll be fine, Mom. Lily always seemed older than her 6 years. But Emily knew Lily was trying to be brave. Her mouth gave her away. The corner turned down for a second before she disguised her frown with a smile. Emily almost canceled her trip on the spot. Lily shook her head. We're gonna party without you. I don't doubt it for a second. Emily's father was arriving any minute and would whisk Lily away to their weekend home for 3 weeks. Lily would have a lake, boats, ducks, a huge yard, and grandparents to entertain her. Emily would be lucky if her daughter checked in once a day as instructed. Just don't forget me. Lily laughed, her quivering lip gone. I won't. She held her hand out for a fist bump. And you don't forget me either. Never. She pulled her close for another hug. You're my number one. Emily's father's booming voice echoed down the hall from the front entryway. Where's my lily flower? Lily's face lit up, and she took off running. Emily was once again thankful that Lily had a grandfather to help fill the holes left by Jackson, Lily's father, who was thankfully not in the picture. Emily kissed her dad's cheek. He stood tall and strong, even though he was well into his 70s. Thanks, Dad. I'll contact you when I get there. You just have some fun. We will be having our own. You can count on that. Lily giggled. Oh, don't I know it. Her father picked up Lily's luggage and winked over his shoulder. Best be going while it's still light. See you later, love bug. Bye, Mom. Lily waved over her shoulder, but then stopped and ran back, throwing her arms around Emily's waist, her chestnut curls cascading down around her head. I love you so much. Her new clothes said she was a tween and all grown up, but her sweet hugs revealed the sweet little girl Emily knew was still there. I love you too. Emily hid her tears. Her father winked again. We'll call every day if you want. Emily nodded. It was silly that she was getting all emotional about this. She was just going to have fun with some old friends who happened to be her age and attractive and male, and had coincidentally remained single. And even though Emily was also single now, she should be able to spend time with them without calling everything a date. She shook her head. What a complicated mess. She would mostly be there on business anyway. The Royal Prince's first summit would be the networking opportunity of the century, and she wouldn't miss it for anything. She watched Lily drive away in her parents' limo until the car turned at the next block. Timothy Parsons cleared his throat behind her. Their butler had been a part of the family since before Emily could remember. Oh, Parsons, off she goes. She does indeed, madam, and if I'm not mistaken, you are soon to follow? Emily lifted her wrist to check the time. Oh my goodness, you are correct. She rushed up the stairs. She was mostly packed, but she still wanted to freshen up a bit and go through her list one last time. Her suite of rooms faced the back acreage of their New Hampshire property. There was an old well out there that always made her smile. Rumor had it that Revolutionary soldiers, and then Union soldiers, had all drunk from their well. Her father had installed a grate across the top of it a few years ago. And when Emily and Lily had moved back in, Emily had been so grateful the potential threat of falling in had been taken care of. When Emily was younger, She used to roll her eyes at her mother's reminders to stay away from the well. Did she think Emily was looking to fall in? But once she'd become a mother, she'd finally appreciated her mother's vigilance. Her mother had been right about most everything, even about Emily's ex-husband. She'd warned Emily about him, but had accepted her decision to marry him, and had loved the man through all his faults, until Emily had come to her, shaking and crying about the hitting. Then she'd been the champion Emily needed, the strong front of resistance to any thoughts of returning to Jackson. Her mother hadn't mentioned him again after that. She hadn't mentioned Rhett either, not by name at least, but the thought of him hovered at the edges of any conversation about her dating life. She threw her bathing suit, makeup bag, and favorite heels into her suitcase and zipped it up. "I'm ready," she called out. Parsons paged her on the intercom. "The car is here. I'll have the driver come up for your luggage." "Thank you. And thank you for always watching over things while we are away." "It has always been my pleasure." When everything was packed up and she was on her way to the airport, she sat back in her seat and closed her eyes. The pilot texted that the jet was ready to go. All she had to do was climb aboard, and she would be off. She smiled. The Mediterranean, old friends, and new ones, and Rhett. She felt her face frown. What was she going to do about Rhett? Ignore him, possibly. Maybe he wouldn't come. She shook her head. Impossible. As far as she could tell, he was the mastermind behind this gathering of royals, and she'd been invited. She could have been added to the list by any number of people, simply by virtue of her being childhood friends with most of them, but she strongly suspected that Rhett had been involved. She smiled. Nico, the Valdez brothers, she couldn't wait to see them all again. And Serafina. It had been too long. That girl was taking the world by storm. She was so proud of her writing, her environmental work. Serafina was changing the literal layout of the Mediterranean. She sipped her drink. She'd asked the staff to have hummus for her on the plane. As soon as they were in the air, she'd calm the rumblings in her stomach, unless they were caused by something other than hunger. Rhett. She pushed away the memory of her feelings for him, but his image would not be stifled. Tall, sparkling eyes, confident stance. What would it be like to command a room like he did? And when they dated, his eyes had only seen her. She dug her fingernails into her palm. The way he'd looked at her made her feel like the most important person in the world. Did she miss him? She certainly missed the way she felt when they were together. But breaking up had ruined their friendship, and she'd lost not only her boyfriend, but her best friend. And that's when she'd turned to Jackson. He'd been everything Rhett wasn't. He wasn't busy. He wasn't organized. He had nothing to do but date her, and she'd loved being the center of his world. But she'd soon noticed that what she thought were strengths were really grave problems, and with them came a quick and powerful temper, which she challenged all the time, even to the point of violent reactions from him. Everything about Jackson told her she'd made a mistake in letting Rhett go. She'd needed him, craved his logical way of looking at the world, but she'd pushed him too far away to reach out. For the 100th time, she questioned whether she should go to the prince's event. Did she really want to participate in the water ski competition? Her team, Mountain Blue, competed every year, but she didn't have to participate. She didn't want to have her heart broken all over again by a guy who was too busy to have the kind of relationship she hoped for. And she didn't want him to get the wrong idea. Her life was falling apart. Her failed marriage, her business in need. But she didn't need him to fix things for her. She just wanted to be friends again. Her heart ached to share confidences with him. And more than anything, she just wanted to see him. She spent the remaining minutes of the drive trying not to think about Rhett. She had other reasons for flying all the way across the ocean that she needed to focus on. And she should have been getting some of her work done. She knew her team was waiting for approval on several pieces of their project. The limo pulled into the hangar that housed her plane. The jet's engine was already running. As she climbed the steps, she greeted the co-pilot. "Hello, Jeremiah." He nodded as he turned to enter the cockpit. "Good to see you, ma'am." She settled into her seat, and her efficient flight crew soon had them in the air. "We've stocked your favorite horchata again." "Oh, thank you, Jorge. I love this stuff." Once they were well into their transatlantic flight, she put all her work away, closed her eyes, and allowed herself to relive a memory. Rhett had just come home from college, and Emily still lived on Ajiri, where his family ruled. Her father used to have one of the main manufacturing plants for Mountain Blue there. She had agreed to meet Rhett at the airport, but there was a last-minute security threat at all Mediterranean airports. Emily hadn't known about the threat. She waited for him with a small poster and his favorite candy bar. But as soon as he boarded the escalator to make his way down to the bottom floor, a team of royal security had come forward and surrounded him, preparing to rush him through the airport. She had seen it before, but not for Rhett, and in that moment, she recognized what it meant to be the heir to a crown. She'd felt intimidated and a little bit afraid. She almost turned to run away, but Rhett had seen her. He had always been a head taller than most people. He yelled for his security to stop. "But Your Highness, I said stop!" He moved towards Emily, and she felt all eyes on her. Soon he was at her side, and once she looked in his eyes, she was filled with relief so strong that she almost forgot where they were. "Hey," he said as he pulled her into a hug. The men circled around them, facing out. "Wow, this is something." "Sorry, I guess there was a large breach in security on another island. We're in lockdown at the castle." He raised an eyebrow. "That probably doesn't sound too inviting, but would you like to join me for lockdown?" "Lock myself in a castle with you?" She grinned. "Absolutely. We still haven't found that last secret entrance." "You're something." "Thanks, Em." She handed him the candy bar. "Good to see you." As they started walking, the men fell in step. Now, all these years later, as she flew back to that world of royals and yachts, she smiled to herself. That was the first of many experiences that eventually tore them apart, and she missed those early days of their relationship. Perhaps if she'd been able to handle the attention, the pressure, they could have been something spectacular. Chapter 3. Rhett stood tall. When he was stressed, standing taller, broadening his stance, and breathing deeply always helped. Something about towering over everyone brought him comfort. He was strong. He could do this. Emily would arrive any minute. He'd invited all of Mountain Blue to join them on the lake today. They were old friends, but he admittedly wanted to see the competition. And he missed the guys. His whole team missed the guys. Everyone blamed him, and his falling out with Emily for the fact that they never saw her brothers anymore. They all still lived in the Mediterranean. Emily and her parents were the only ones who had gone back to live in the States. His phone dinged, and the security feed showed the front gate. Emily's brother Carlson moved in close so that only his eye was visible. Security beeped them through, and the guys laughed. Clint grinned. "I miss those guys. Are you and Emily not on the outs anymore? Can we, hang with the bros?" "I don't know why Emily and I have anything to do with it. Hang with whoever you like." Clint held up his hands. "Okay, I get you. Let's just say I and the rest of the guys are happy. Things are almost back to normal." The whole boathouse amped up in volume as the 5 brothers showed up, and the princes were joined by some serious wealth and testosterone. Emily's brothers. Mountain Blue was their water ski competition team, their brand, and the source of their family's wealth. They were based in America, but had spent most of their lives in the Mediterranean. Rhett got out his blowhorn, and everyone took to the docks. There were enough boats for everyone, and they knew not to touch Rhett's new craft. Rhett waited. Had Emily not come? He tried not to feel deflated. The guys were all piling into boats. Carlson waved to him before hopping in the nearest mastercraft. But no Emily. Rhett stepped back, suddenly not as interested in the competition. But then she stepped through the doorway, and Rhett stopped breathing. "Hey!" She rocked forward and backward on her toes, just like she used to. He choked, swallowed, and reached for his water. "Hey!" he rasped. She walked closer. "I thought I'd wait until the guys were mostly down at the docks." Rhett looked around. There were a few stragglers who were all ears, but he ignored them. "Good call. So..." He searched her face, its goodness reminding him of so many missed opportunities. "It's good to see you." "Yeah, you too." She shrugged. Maybe we can do more of this? I'd like that. The guys would too. She rolled her eyes. Not sure why a bunch of grown men can't get together on their own. Because they're ridiculous. So, want to ride with me in the new Mastercraft? You know I do. Do you need to train with your team? What? No, I'm not going to compete. He wasn't sure if he was more relieved or disappointed. What? You're here. You have to compete. Are you? Oh, well, I thought I'd just let the guys duke it out. See? Well, now I'm sort of torn here. Should I be your friend and talk you into racing? Or should I do right by my teammates and let it slide? Well, I don't know if you have that much influence. She stopped. Is that? Her gaze had drifted over to the floor-length windows that lined the boathouse. What a doofus! Clint had Donovan on his shoulders as they stood on the dock, ready to do a dock start. The other guys had their phones out and were recording. Emily laughed. I think they're gonna sink to the bottom before the boat can plane. Rhett and Emily watched, side by side, and Rhett felt the missing pieces in his life realign. This is nice. I've missed you. This. She indicated his place next to her. Yes, this. And you. Her eyes sparkled at him. She challenged him in every way, and he couldn't expect to get away with any comment unless he meant it. I missed you too. The blowhorn blared out over the water, and the boat took off with Clint gripping the ski rope handle and Donovan shouting and waving. But as soon as the boat had taken up half the slack, Donovan leaped down. Clint tossed him another handle, and they hit the water just as the rope went taut. They took off side by side. Rhett shook his head. Classic. I'm impressed. You guys have been practicing. You worried we might give your team some competition? Nah, but it's fun to see the guys. Rhett laughed off her competitive attitude. She was the real deal, and he appreciated every bit of her. How long are you in town? She hesitated. He knew it was a leading question, and that she might not be ready for it. But then she rocked forward on her feet and turned to him. Not very long, a couple weeks. She looked up at him. Maybe 3. He nodded. Then we better hit the water. I was wondering, while I'm here, could we do Nepo? Absolutely. I haven't climbed that peak since the last time we did it. I believe it. That was definitely a day to remember. Would have scared away anyone less determined. But not us. They laughed, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders without thinking. She stiffened. He pulled away. Sorry, habit. No, it's all right. Please do that again. You sure? I don't want to make you uncomfortable. I'm not uncomfortable. It's just... She looked away, then lifted her chin and shrugged. It's just been a while. 10 years, 4 months. She widened her eyes. Yes, for us. But I meant it's been a while since I've been with anyone. It just, well, it feels nice, the touch, the closeness. She sidled up to him. And we're old friends, right? She laughed. It feels safe. Was she trying to convince herself or him? Maybe she'd been through more than he realized. He wasn't sure how he felt about the friend vibe, but he was happy she seemed so comfortable with him. He replaced his arm and held her close to his side. So, when do you want to tackle Nepo? Tomorrow? Whoa, so soon. Don't you want to ski or get ready for the competition? Emily tapped her chin. Oh, well, you probably do, don't you? I should have thought of that. As for me, I'm really not competing. But you're the best. She shrugged. Come on, let's get out there on the water. I'm game. Show me this new boat of yours. It's so awesome. It has a whole computerized system that works with the skier and navigates the pull and race at the rope and compensates for speed. A smart boat? He laughed. Yes, exactly. And it's great for wakeboarding when we're just messing around in between competitions. They made their way down the stairs to the covered slip. He was excited to show off his boat, surprisingly so. Her approval of his latest toy became more important than anything else at the moment. They climbed in, and he backed the boat out of the slip. She pulled her shirt over her head and stowed it away. Seeing her in a swimsuit made him smile. Not only did she look amazing, but it felt like coming home. This was how life was supposed to be. Emily beside him, out on the water. He pulled off his shirt, and as he reached over her to stow it in the glove box, the air between them felt charged. He enjoyed her gaze as it lifted from his abs to his face. And when their eyes met, she held him captive. She was so familiar. The turn of her smile, the dimple on her right cheek, the speckles in her hazel eyes. He winked and then sat back in the captain's chair. Everyone else was already out in his other boats. He saw Clint taking the course and 2 other boats waiting to drive through the buoys. "Let's go over to the islands." Emily's eyes sparkled with adventure. "Ha! I haven't thought about them in years. I think about them all the time." She pulled her hair back in a ponytail, her auburn curls fighting to be free. Her long, slender neck was as beautiful as ever, her profile pert and fun, her face elegant. He loved her solid presence. Man, he'd missed her. And he was so happy that they had the chance to rebuild some sort of friendship, but he couldn't let himself feel more for her than that. He'd spent the last 10 years trying to fill the holes she'd left. They'd both decided it wouldn't work. There was no reason to try again. Friendship would have to do. He sped across the lake, leaving the others behind, and turned out of the bay, speeding into the next. They were surrounded on all sides by forest. The blue-green water, clear as glass, rippled out beneath them. He sped towards the opposite side of the bay. An outsider would never spot what he sought, a small inlet. They turned down a path between the trees and followed it until the water opened up again to a smaller bay. In the center of this new space was their island. "It looks the same." She stood, staring out across the water. "I haven't been here since." He thought of their last visit, and for the first time in years, thought he might actually be blushing. Emily laughed. "Are you embarrassed?" "Maybe." He turned to her and shook his head. "No, not embarrassed. It's one of my best memories." He felt insecure being so honest with her. "Mine too, actually." She looked up towards the island. "Do you think anything's changed?" "I don't think anyone comes here but us." "You haven't showed anyone?" "No." How could he? Their moments there had been special. Their kiss. He couldn't think about their kiss right now. Not if he wanted to make sure she felt the casual friend vibe from him. Her smile seemed a bit victorious. But he couldn't be irritated at her. He pulled the boat forward, and just like they always had, she hopped up to reach for the rope to tie to a tree. "It's still here." They jumped up onto the land, right where a path led them back through the trees. It was overgrown, but still visible. They made their way to the center of the island, and Rhett laughed. "Our house!" They ran to the makeshift shelter they had built. "It really is all still here." She hurried inside. The table they'd made, the shelves. She pulled out the waterproof emergency kit, caressing the top. "Do you suppose?" Rhett sat beside her on the floor of their fort. She lifted the lid and pulled out their journal. "Oh, look, it's still here." "You keep saying that." "I know, but, Rhett, so much has happened since then. You and I, we weren't speaking, and then I got married. I have a daughter. She would love this place. So many things are so different, and yet—" She held up their diary. "Should we read it?" She blushed, bright red, and shook her head. "No?" "Eh?" He leaned forward to try to open the first page. Number, she placed her hand over top of his, and a wonderful warmth traveled up his arm. He sidled closer to her, so close that when she turned her head to look up into his eyes, he could feel the puff of her breath on his lips. "You sure?" She swallowed and licked her lips. Then, with the tiniest shake of her head, she turned away. She pushed herself to her feet. "We should go." "Yes, of course." He joined her as she headed to the door. "But only if I can take you through the course." Once she almost shook her head but then nodded. "Okay, let's do it." His fist pumped the air. "Let's go." He took the path out of their small bay, the journal pressed against the waistband of his shorts. She may not want to read it, and perhaps he shouldn't, but he couldn't bring himself to leave it behind. They made their way over to where the others were practicing and got in line to take a run at the buoys. Nico waved, then cupped his hands to yell, "Tell Emily to take a run!" Rhett waved back. "She's going next!" The Valdez boat cheered, and Emily smiled. "You have fans!" "I've missed this," Rhett smiled. "Move back. Live here again." She turned away and started adjusting a ski boot. "You remember how I like to run?" "Perfectly." She skied at 22 miles per hour, unless dipping around a buoy. Sometimes she liked to take it slower. "Good." She lifted her ski and zipped up her life vest. "Hey, you okay? You don't have to move back." "I know, I'm fine." She sat on the back platform, slipped the ski on, and then slid down into the water, rope in hand. He tossed the rest of the rope out into the water and turned on the boat, idling forward slowly to take up the slack. When the rope was taut and she was ready, she shouted, "Hit it!" Rhett gunned it at exactly the speed she preferred. She popped up out of the water with her signature shout, "Woo! Whoop, whoop, whoop!" And then she immediately dug in, cutting through the water with a huge rooster tail spraying out behind her. He could see her smile through his mirror, and it was a beautiful thing. He'd love to see that smile every day. But she would go back to America in 3 weeks, and he had no idea when he'd get to see her again. But at least she would talk to him now. Things were already much better than they had been. She took the first buoy, digging in, whipping her ski around it, and cutting across the wake so fast even Rhett was amazed. He'd seen her ski 1,000 times. He'd trained with her growing up. They had basically learned together, but he'd never seen her ski with such a vengeance. She took the next buoy before she even arrived there, swinging her ski forward and around, and cutting back before she'd even finished the huge rooster tail. They finished the course with a perfect run. He was astounded. She signaled she wanted to keep going, so he turned to find some smooth water on the other side of the bay, with her digging and cutting all the while. The more he watched, the more certain he became. Somehow, someway, he'd have to convince her to stay. Chapter 4. Rhett kept the boat at a slow, no-wake speed as they cruised back into their bay. Emily dabbed her face and neck with a plush towel. Rhett watched her. So far, he hadn't said anything, but she read his face so well. A part of her was pleased that she could still guess at what he was thinking. She adjusted her ponytail. They obviously still shared a good amount of attraction. Did she want to step closer to his solid, packed chest? Heck yes. Did she really want him to push the friendship envelope, though? Last time, that hadn't worked well at all. And now she had Lily to think of. And he lived on an island in the Mediterranean. And she had her career, and— "Stop." Rhett held up his hands, laughing. "What?" "Just stop that train of thought right now." "Oh, you think you know what I'm thinking?" "Probably, and you're overthinking things. Look, I'm just happy you're back in my life and not frowning at me." She laughed, chagrined. She'd been steamrolling herself into a panic. "Well, I'm happy about that too." She sat in the chair next to the driver's seat. "I would not want us to continue with this strange silence for another 10 years. "Exactly." He turned on the motor again. "How long are you here?" 2 weeks, remember? Maybe 3. She replaced her sunglasses. "But I have meetings for Mountain Blue, and we have Harrington family stuff to take care of. And a water ski competition to win." "Well, yes." "Okay, I respect that you're busy, but in the middle of all that, let's be together." "Together?" She raised an eyebrow. That was bold, even for him. "Together as friends or friendly? Together not fighting?" She nodded slowly. "I'd like that. I could use more friends. Sorry, not just more friends. I could use my oldest, best friend back in my life." She smiled sincerely, hoping he knew she meant it. "I'll be back in your life however you'll take me." They pulled back up to his dock as she considered him. She knew he was in between relationships, that he'd have another pretty girl on his arm before too long. But she wasn't sure how serious he'd been about any of them, or how true the tabloids' reporting was. She exhaled slowly. She absolutely could not let her heart become engaged. She couldn't move forward with any sort of expectation that their relationship would progress past friendship. But she was tired of the discord, and she longed to mend things. Friends would be perfect, though she had to admit that she hadn't come solely for Rhett. And I need the guys. What was that? Rhett had the ropes and was gathering up life jackets. I need the guys. I need to pick up a few more sponsors. She hoped she'd kept the desperation out of her voice. She was meant to pitch it like the great opportunity it was, not like a last-ditch effort to save her company, which it also was. Okay, do you want to just pitch it to me? I could, but I need everyone in. It will work best if we all agree together. Now I'm curious. Maybe I can practice my pitch on you. I'd like that. And I get first dibs on whatever financial opportunity this is. Anything Mountain Blue is involved in turns to gold. If only that were true. Of course. I'll give you first dibs after you hear the pitch. Listen to see if you want in. I already know I do. His confidence in her spurred a twinge of guilt and a new warmth of feeling toward him. Thanks. Once everything was stowed away, they walked up the boat ramp towards the house. I can't believe I'm back here. It almost feels like we jumped back in time and we're all still 18. Almost. Clint fell out the two-story window, Donovan hanging onto his ankles. Some moments more than others. As soon as they entered the door, Emily's older brother Carlson crossed his arms. What's this? Hey, Carlson! Rhett held out his hand for a fist bump, but Carlson kept his arms crossed. Something I should know about here? Emily shook her head. No, we were just catching up, as friends. Finally. Rhett smiled. Really? Carlson stood taller and reached for both of them, pulling them against his sides. Guys! He shouted to the whole house. The rest of the guys gathered at the top of the stairs. The duo is back. We already knew that. A few of them grumbled as they made their way back into the upper loft. So does this mean we can attend the Prince's Gala again? Rhett frowned. You were never barred from the gala. Carlson rose both eyebrows in Emily's direction. Oh! Yeah, Emily wouldn't let us go. Emily stepped away. So why don't you guys have any girls with you? I'm almost drowning in testosterone. Brooks, one of the most eligible men in the world, and their friend, scooted over and waved. You're enough woman for all of us. Come on, let's catch up. She couldn't help it. Her eyes went to Rhett. He was watching, but she forced herself to act casual. She needed to get all these guys on board with Mountain Blue. And Brooks didn't just have dark, thick hair and striking blue eyes. He also had a sharp intellect and owned more businesses than any of them. She sat next to him, and he smiled his signature grin. So how's the incredibly talented Emily? He seeped sincerity. Even though it might sound a bit over the top, he was the kind of guy who meant what he said. And because of that, his compliments always warmed down to her toes. Huh, not sure how she's doing, but I'm doing well. Did I hear Lily is 10 now? Touched that he even knew her daughter's name, she bumped him with her shoulder. Yes, and currently being spoiled by my father. I'm glad you could come, Em. Things are better when you're around. His gaze flashed to Rhett. I'm here on business, too. His eyebrows rose in interest. Yes, I have an investment opportunity. I'm giving the Prince Society first dibs. Brooks leaned forward. I'm interested, and might be the most solvent of anyone right now. I could jump in tomorrow. Emily forced herself not to jump all over that opportunity. You're in. I'm calling a meeting in the next few days to tell everyone about it. I'll save you second pick. Second? His eyebrow rose. She glanced at Rhett, who was still watching. Say no more. He leaned away. No? It's not like that. Like what? You two are simmering with tension. The good kind. Her face heated, and it spread to her toes. I don't know what you're talking about. Then how come we're getting Rhett's death stare? I'm not looking over there again. Well, you know the look, and I'm getting it. She laughed because she didn't know what else to do. Well, whatever that is has nothing to do with me. His gaze turned speculative. More than one of us here would love to talk more with you, explore things. He rested his arm behind her back. But we've all felt like you're untouchable. She swallowed, unsure where she wanted this to go with Brooks, or any of the others. You don't have to answer now. Just think about it. Is the awesome M available? He searched her face, his eyes full of his signature sincerity. I'd like to be the first to know about that, too. She nodded. But someone was going to have to tell her first. Was she available? Was she ready to date again? She glanced back at Rhett, who still hadn't stopped looking in their direction. Then she searched the room full of men she'd known since she was a little girl. She used to think this would be the last place she'd find a husband, but now she knew that some of the best men she'd ever met were all in this house, and she'd known them her whole life. But she had a business to think of, and even more important, a daughter. She just didn't think she could have another relationship. After her first, did she really want one? 5. Rhett wanted to punch his friend. Brooke's smiles, Emily's laughs, his arm across her shoulders. It all made him ill, even though he had no right to feel that way. 2 weeks. What would he do with these 2 weeks? Convince Emily to let him date her again? Watch while one of the other guys got smart and scooped her up right in front of his eyes? The party was winding down. He'd watched Emily make her way around the room, talking to all the guys. Rhett assumed she was getting their support for her new financial venture. He was proud of her, and he couldn't believe how far she'd come. Mountain Blue was one of the most respected sports and recreation gear companies in the world. The guys started to trickle out, except for Brooks, Carlson, and a few of the Valdez brothers. Rhett hoped Emily was lingering to talk with him, but she hadn't come near him at all. Rhett texted his staff, telling them when to come clean up. He was suddenly tired. None of the old games were as fun for him anymore. Maybe he would hit the sack early, and the guys could show themselves out. They'd done it countless times before. Emily laughed, and Brooks put his hand on the small of her back. Rhett ignored them, rolling his shoulders as he stepped into his office. A couple things from the Committee on Environmental Reform were weighing on him. Perhaps he would check a few emails. He left the door cracked and was soon lost in his overflowing inbox. He wasn't sure how much time had passed when the soft clearing of a throat caught his attention. He looked up. Emily. The pleased rush that roared in his ears made him smile. He checked his watch. Oh, wow, it's late. I'm sorry. Have you been there long? In the doorway? She stepped closer. Can I come in? Sure, yes, of course. She walked around the office, studying his pictures on the walls, mostly of water skiing. She stopped at one of her winning the water ski championship. This is incredible. I haven't seen this picture in years. It's when you won Worlds. He stood, making his way to stand next to her. I'm actually in it. If you look really closely, you'll see my blurry photobomb. She squinted, her eyes close to the image. Oh, yep, I see you, wearing red. The very one. She turned to him, standing closer than he expected. You keep it hanging on your wall? She backed up to lean against the wall, and Rhett missed her nearness. He stepped closer. I do. And sometimes I come and look at it. You do? Yes. This woman here, she inspires me. She entered this championship in the men's category and kicked our sorry skis to the shoreline. She dug in around each buoy, showing us how talent and grit can change the world. Her eyes widened, and she opened her mouth but said nothing. Then she swallowed. You're amazing, Emily. I hope things are going well for you, that someone in your life tells you how great you are, and often. Her face clouded in pain, and she turned away. 'Cause I'm happy to fill that role. You'd be my royal flatterer? Well, sure. I do find it easy to point out your awesomeness whenever it's required, but I was thinking I could be a bit more than that. Her eyes shone. I just don't know how I let so much time go by without trying to reconnect. It's how we roll, though, isn't it? Too busy to connect with people outside of our day-to-day life? Is that how we roll? Not anymore. Rhett stepped closer. I don't know anything except that I am never letting that happen again. Friends? Her eyes were filled with hope, so he hid his own disappointment that she wasn't interested in anything more. Friends. He tugged at the front of her shirt and pulled her closer. She stepped into his arms, her softness pressed up against him. As his arms circled her back and his chin rested on the top of her head, he realized again how precious she was. Her strength was a cover for the tender, sincere woman he'd known almost all his life. As he hugged her, his protective instincts kicked in, and he wanted nothing more than to shelter her for as long as she would let him. Come live here. What? She stepped away. No. I just meant, look, Rhett, you can't think this friendship is going anywhere. We're friends, that's it. You don't need to be blunt. I get it. Hurt shattered him. He tried to bury it, but he could feel the resentment building anyway. Rhett, I came here for 2 weeks on business. I'm happy to see you, but I'm not the reason you're here. Right. She reached a hand out to rest on his arm. But that doesn't mean I'm not happy to mend things, to be friends again. I'm just saying, I think you might be happier here. With you? Yes. No. Yes, with me, your best friend. With all your friends. This isn't a marriage proposal. Don't flatter yourself. The words came out before he could bite his tongue. Believe me, I'm not. She stepped away. I don't need you that way, Rhett. I need investors. Come to my meeting. Support my efforts. That's what you can do for me. Otherwise, leave me alone. Her face was pinched in pain, and she turned away. Emily, don't. She paused, then shook her head. We're fine. We're friends. That's the best place to leave this. Understood. She nodded and turned from him. The next few hours, alone in his office, passed slowly. And no matter how many scenarios he reviewed in his mind, he couldn't come to one that didn't end in the same disastrous way. He and Emily had never been able to successfully be anything but friends. So, friends it would be. If that was the only way he could be close to her, he would be happy. He thought about Brooks and gritted his teeth, even if he would once again have to watch while she married another. Chapter 6. Emily knew she should be reviewing the pitch she was about to give to a room full of some of the wealthiest people in the world. But instead, she was scrolling through old photos, albums of her and Rhett and the guys when they were all young. She zoomed in on their earliest photo. It was the earliest one she had, because that was the year she got her first camera phone. They were sitting on towels and holding lime popsicles, and their skin was as brown as she had ever been. Sun-kissed in every way, she'd fit in with most of the Mediterranean royals in color, and in the careless recklessness of youth, particularly youth with unrestricted wealth. They held up their treats, Rhett's impish smile making her laugh even now, so many years later. Right before the photo was taken, they had thrown their towels over the proof of their prank on the royal house of Torin. They were sitting on cans of shaving cream and rolls of toilet paper, bumpy and uncomfortable under their backsides. She went through the images, and she saw in her and Rhett's faces the moment when they started to feel differently for each other. His spark was more protective, hers more self-conscious. And then the picture she should have buried long ago. Someone had caught a snap of her watching him give a speech. Her face said it all, adoration in every feature. She remembered clearly the day he had addressed his nation about the deep environmental problems facing the Mediterranean and how proud of him she was. He'd even used some of her words. They'd agonized over the phrasing before it went through PR. She sighed. There weren't many images after that one. Their phones had been replaced by assistants and extremely busy schedules as they finished up doctoral programs and began their responsibilities as adults. She whipped through some of the press shots she'd saved in the early days when she'd missed him like crazy, and he'd seemed too busy to care. There weren't many the next year. And she knew what filled that hole: pictures of her and Jackson. She kept scrolling through the remaining images she'd not deleted from that terrible time in her life, and then stopped on one she'd never seen before. At least she didn't remember it being there. Her wedding. But this photo was of Rhett. He'd been there. A lot of the guys had come, and someone had taken a shot of him watching Emily and Jackson dancing. Emily zoomed in on his face and then looked away, clutching her heart. Her face squinched in pain. She looked again, the lines of sorrow on Rhett's face breaking her heart. He'd thought himself unobserved in a quiet corner, and the pain was obvious as he watched the dance that they both thought would separate them forever. She ran a finger over his face, and the image shifted under her touch. "I'm sorry, Rhett." "What did you do now?" She sucked in her breath and wiped her eyes. Brooks stood in the doorway. "Brooks?" "Hey, superstar. I'm here to help get you pumped for your pitch." "Oh, right. Thank you." She smiled, trying to recover. She felt like her heart had been torn again, and she had to take 3 deep breaths before she could convince herself that she and Rhett were in a good place. It might not be perfect, but no one's heart was broken. Brooks pulled up a chair. "So, what did you do to Rhett?" Her eyes flashed to his. He leaned back. "Okay, no need to answer that. Let's talk about your presentation." She pulled up the PowerPoint file, even though she had it memorized. He was a world-renowned business expert. It would be stupid to turn down his offer. She went through the speedy version, and he listened, his razor-sharp eyes catching everything. Then, when she finished, he flipped back to the beginning and refined every slide with angles, emotion, and detail she would have never considered. She took notes furiously. When he was finished, he turned to her. "You're gonna blow this out of the water, babe. They won't know what hit them. They'll come stumbling forward with their wallets open." She laughed. "Well, I hope so. I could use the funds." He brushed a hair out of her face. "What's this about?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, Mountain Blue has never run investor campaigns. You're not a startup. What's going on?" She pressed her lips together. "Say no more. You have enough capital in this meeting to save a small country. But if you need more than financial backing, consulting, advice." He rested a hand over hers. "Support. You know where to come." He was so kind. His eyes were earnest. She stared deep into them, wondering where he was going with his offers of help. What exactly did he want from her? Could she picture him with Lily? She had so many things to think about in response to his simple gesture. "Thank you, Brooks." She pulled her hand away. "Yes, thank you, Brooks." Rhett stood in the doorway, his displeasure obvious. The room shrank a little bit, with the 2 tall, broad-shouldered men filling it. Rhett stood taller, and Emily was reminded clearly that a king to an island nation stood in her office. Was there anything left of the boy she'd known? Perhaps. But at this moment, he made the air sizzle with power and testosterone. Brooks stood. "Rhett!" Rhett nodded and waited. The 2 men stared at each other for a moment more. Then Brooks shrugged. "If you need anything else, just shoot me a message. I've got your back." She stood and leaned forward to hug him. "Thanks for everything." His arms felt tender. His gentle kiss on her cheek was warm. Then he dipped his head and brushed Rhett's shoulder as he left. "Rhett, what are you doing?" "What do you mean?" "Standing there with all your kingly status." "What are you talking about?" "You literally forced Brooks from the room." "Do you want me to call him back? Is that what this is about?" "No. What good would that do? Look, he came early to help me with the presentation. It was nice of him." "I could have done that. I'm here." She shook her head. "Come in. Shut the door." Everyone would be arriving soon. Rhett wiggled his eyebrows as soon as the door was shut, which made her laugh and dissolved some of the tension. "What are you doing here, really? Besides trying to scare away Brooks?" Not many could scare that man away. Brooks had probably left only because he didn't want Emily to be uncomfortable, which she appreciated. "Just checking on you." He reached into the drawstring backpack he carried. "I brought you something." When he pulled out a unicorn, She laughed and ran to him. Is this? Pointy? What? The white on the hooves was scuffed up, and the point of the horn seemed a bit bent, but it was obviously pointy. How did you find it? I've had it for years. I just wasn't sure what to do with it. She hugged it to her chest. I can't even believe it. He'd made fun of her unicorn for almost the whole time they'd known each other, but he knew why she loved it. No one believes in them, but that doesn't make them fantasy. Yes, I know. He reached for her. Even though I haven't been around, and you probably had plenty of moments you could have used a friend, I guess I just want you to know I believe in you. Tears welled up. Oh, Rhett! She allowed him to enfold her in his strong arms, and the strength that came from his declaration filled her. Do you? Believe in you? Absolutely. If Emily Harrington is involved, magic happens. You can do anything you put your heart to. She nodded. Thank you. She stepped away, took one more look at Pointy, and put it on her desk. Let's do this. He opened the door. After you. As she passed him, he whispered, and it was good thinking to involve Brooks. She eyed him in suspicion, then nodded. Thank you. They made their way down the hallway, and she had the absurd wish to hold his hand. But he'd given her Pointy, and that was enough. They opened the door to the conference room in the chalet she'd rented. It was huge, and a table filled most of it. At the table sat some of her best childhood friends, and all the princes from the newly formed Prince Society. She'd also invited the women she most admired in the area. Sarah sat next to Train. She smiled at that. Hopefully, they could make things work. She moved to take her place at the head of the table. Brooks sat at her left, and Rhett moved to sit at the opposite end of the table. He winked. She took a deep breath and began. While she talked, she felt Brooks' support, and she sought out Rhett's response. How was it coming across? Would he approve? But he showed no emotion as he studied her, just as he had last time they were together. But she thought about Pointy and what he'd said. I believe in you. And those words carried her. She felt like a fraud, and she knew she was in essence begging for money. But he believed in her. She could do this. Mountain Blue could overcome its challenges and rise to what it once was. And so, as a team, we can push Mountain Blue into a new decade of continued growth and returns. Brooks clapped when she was finished. That was awesome, Em. You have our full support. We'll take the highest investment percentage possible. Others joined in his exuberance, and by the end of the meeting, they'd all signed on in one form or other. Except Rhett. The guys all headed to Rhett's boathouse to practice. The competition was 5 days away. Brooks high-fived her. You nailed that. Thanks to your additions. Really, Brooks, it made all the difference. He shrugged. I'm here for you, Em. He looked over his shoulder at Rhett, still standing in the back of the room. No matter what. She nodded. Thank you. That means a lot. All of your support does. Call me. Let's talk about what's really going on. I feel like there's more I can do there, too. She hesitated and then nodded slowly. Maybe. Good enough. Then he turned and left, nodding at Rhett. The room was quiet for a moment, then Rhett approached. So, why the huge pitch for financial backing? I told you, we're moving into new opportunities, new avenues, diversifying. She let her voice trail off, feeling unaccountably guilty that she was hesitating to disclose their hardship, but she refused to offer more. I can free up some of the capital of Ajira and be an official sponsor, or I can be like the other guys and sign up for a percentage from my personal investment portfolio. Tell me what would be the best fit. She didn't know what he was asking. Whatever makes the most sense for you, I guess. That's fair. But, Emily, is there more I can do? I'd do anything for you. Why do I feel like this is a cry for help more than an investment opportunity? His face was open, curious, concerned, but she couldn't bring herself to disappoint him, to show herself as the failure she was. How could she tell him her last 3 ventures had failed in the few short years she'd been at the head of Mountain Blue? That she wasn't sure anything else she wanted to try wouldn't be an equal failure? She couldn't. Besides, the company could turn around. People asked for investors all the time. This was nothing different. You're misreading. This isn't a cry for help. She swallowed back her half-truth, hoping it wasn't obvious on her face, and tried to mask her worry. I'll give you whatever you need, Emily. You know that. He lifted her bag and put it on her shoulder. And now what I want to know is, are you ready to hike, Nepo? Her shoulders relaxed. More than anything. Okay, let's go. What, right now? Sure. I've got the Jeep packed. Just like that, take off? I've cleared my whole day. Suddenly, she felt free and ready for some fun. Her pitch was done. The guys had supported her. Now she was free to have fun like she used to. Okay, I'm ready. Let me get changed. Soon they were both sitting in his Jeep. The doors and top were off, and wind blew through her hair. She knew that a security detail was following, but she tried to ignore them. She knew that someone might see them and take a picture, but she didn't care. For now, the world circled around Rhett and Emily like it used to, and they were going to hike to their favorite spot. Everything would look small from up there, and it would all be okay. She shouted, "Whoop, whoop," and turned on the music. Rhett laughed and smiled at her, reaching for her hand. She let his fingers twine with hers, and the ache of familiar tingles made her heart grow. Her chest seemed to expand with acceptance. She wanted more. Happiness, security, partnership. And Rhett seemed to offer all those things. She could allow herself to pretend, for a day, that there was a what if when it came to Rhett. If he didn't run a country, if she didn't have to worry about Lily, if the last 10 years hadn't separated them. Even though all of those things mattered, and opening up even the tiniest weakness to Rhett could prove disastrous, she let go and planned to just enjoy the day. Chapter 7. Rhett exulted in the beautiful woman at his side. In his Jeep was one of his favorite places to see Emily. Her thick, deep red hair filled the air behind them until she pulled it back into her signature ponytail. He echoed her shout. All right, let's go. Whoop, whoop. He used the digital console to casually adjust their music to his Emily playlist, and suddenly they were taken back in time to the music of their favorite band. Song after song accompanied them through the windy roads to the base of the mountain trail. By the time they hit the parking lot for the trailhead, they were both singing at the top of their lungs with pretend microphones in hand. The Jeep pulled to a stop, and Rhett tried not to notice the other cars in the parking lot and the straggling hiker at the drinking fountain. Hopefully they wouldn't recognize their king, and he and Emily could hike in peace. He shouldered a backpack. He'd filled it with extra water and trail mix. Then they hit the trail. We're so late heading up. I think we can hit the sunset if we pace it right. I'd love to see the valley in daylight first, and then we can watch the sunset. Rhett set a clipped pace, hoping they would be able to do just as she wished. The first part of the hike passed through the woods that circled the peak. The ground was covered with a small-leaved holly, and the air smelled of pine. Now and then, the air was cooled by a breeze that came off of the river rushing down from the peak. Their talk of memories carried them for the first couple hours of the hike, and then their trail opened up onto the bald hilltop. A rolling meadow spread out in front of them, and just as Rhett had been told, the wildflowers were in full bloom. The small gasp beside him was reward enough for all the effort to get them up there, for all the missed appointments, and the rescheduling of his ribbon cutting on a new wing to the museum. As he watched the woman beside him and relived their memories on this very hike all those years ago, he knew nothing could replace these moments. If only he'd realized their importance all those years ago, when he'd let her slip away. He knew his busy lifestyle, his inability to prioritize time with her, had driven her away. But he committed to not make the same mistake again. Oh, wait! Emily pulled out her phone. Lily has to see this. Would you like me to take your picture? Yes, we should be taking more pictures. But do you mind if I FaceTime her for a moment? Not at all. I'd love that. Emily's phone connected after 2 rings. Hello? Mom! Lily's excited voice made Rhett smile. Hi, baby girl, look where I am. She turned her phone in a wide sweep. The squeals on the other end sounded so familiar to Rhett, like Emily from the old days. That's so pretty, Mama. Look at all those flowers. Look at this one, right here. Emily zoomed in closer on a small blue bloom. This one reminds me of your eyes. Then your eyes, too. Right, Mama? Absolutely, baby girl. Now I want you to meet one of my old friends. Okay. Who? Emily moved to Rhett's side and showed his face to her daughter. This is Rhett. Uncle Rhett. He puffed out his chest and gave a goofy smile that made Emily laugh. I have an Uncle Rhett. Emily smiled at him. You do now. And guess what? He's not just anyone. He's a king. What? She giggled. If my uncle's a king, does that make me a princess? Absolutely. Rhett leaned in closer. Princess Lily from now on. Okay, she giggled again. Grandpa, I'm Princess Lily now. Emily's father peered into the phone, and Rhett felt his stomach turn. Hello, Mr. Harrington. Emily's father hadn't been overly pleased with Rhett's lack of attention to his daughter, nor with his refusal to follow her to America and try to win her back. Oh, it's His Royal Highness. You can just call me Rhett. Fitting, since I was the first and perhaps only person to ground you? Emily bit her thumb. Yes, precisely. Gives you extra privileges. Emily, are you there too? She peered in the camera at her father. Hey, Dad. Hey, something a bit strange happened. Jackson called, wanted to talk to Lily. Emily's face went white, but she answered casually. Oh, and did he? For a moment, but I stayed on the line, and it seemed fine. Okay. No visits, though, remember? Oh, I know. Don't worry about that. How's your trip? Great. We're hiking Napo. Oh, that's a beautiful walk. Take lots of pictures. Will do, Dad. Gotta go. Love you, Lily. You being as good as ever. You know it. Goodbye, Mom. Love you. And goodbye, King Rhett. Goodbye, Princess. Her excited squeals were the last thing they heard before the phone disconnected. She's an angel. What a beautiful girl you're raising. I pinch myself sometimes. She's such a good girl. She's my life now. She's something special. I can tell. He laughed. She reminds me a whole lot of her mother. Haj, really? Emily's excited expression warmed his heart. Absolutely. Brought me right back to our tree climbing days. Same voice, same inflection, and even the same energy. Emily's steps were lighter and had a definite bounce after talking with her daughter. Do you miss her? Like I left my arm at home. Bring her sometime, anytime. I'd love to spend some time with her too. Emily's troubled expression said more than any words would have. She wasn't ready to involve him in Lily's life. So Rhett let it alone. They started up the steep switchbacks. A low rumbling behind him stopped them both in their tracks. They turned slowly and groaned together at the thick, dark clouds rolling in. When did that get there? Emily asked, peering up at the oncoming storm. You know how it is. They come fast with no warning. 3 successive flashes of lightning accentuated his words as the wind picked up. We're gonna have to find shelter. Emily turned in a full circle. There wasn't even a tree in sight. The clouds moved closer, and Rhett wasn't sure which direction to go. Did they run back to the woods, or did they head up over the ridge? There's a cave on the other side. Oh, you're right. Let's go. Emily took off running. He laughed. Decision made, he followed her, trying to beat the weather. As they reached the rocky ridge, the rain hit. They had no warning drops, just a sudden downpour. The ground turned dangerously slick, and Emily slipped, catching herself with her hands. Rhett reached forward, lifting and steadying her. They scrambled up the remaining rock, clinging to each other as they tried to keep their balance. Then they slipped over the other side and around the path. Rhett took the lead and slid through a crack between the rocks. Emily followed. The air was immediately cold on their wet skin. The sky was darker, and the cave was almost without light. Rhett reached inside and turned on his flashlight, shining it ahead into the space. Emily turned in a circle. I don't think we've ever been in here. Nope, I'm certain we haven't. I just discovered it a few years ago. Then this is nice. Oh? And why's that? New beginnings? Where do we start from here? I like that. She shivered, and he reached into his backpack. In the meantime, here's a sweatshirt. I think we might be in here for a while. She pulled it on while he checked his phone. It wouldn't connect. Oh, that's not good. What? Emily stood at his side immediately. My phone won't connect. The security detail is going to go nuts. They know where we are. Of course, but the storm, and then I go off the grid. Oh, I see. He moved to the opening of the cave, the rain still pouring down and rushing in a river outside the entrance. Still no bars? That flooding out there doesn't look too good either. No, it doesn't. There would be rescue teams, helicopters, and all his security detail on high alert right now. If things got too bad, they'd call in Luke Valdez, the Tauran prince over high security. All this commotion would draw the attention of the press, and the last thing he wanted was countrywide speculation about another relationship with the ever-interesting Emily Harrington, heiress to her own American wealth. She was the stuff of legends where his country was concerned. None of that could be helped now. Looks like we might be here for a while. Should we explore? Sure. At least there aren't any animal smells. True. I think we're too high up on the bald part of the mountain to attract many animals besides goats. They circled the walls of their new shelter, but found that it was just a small opening in the rocks, more like a room, with no further exits or openings. Let's sit near the opening and watch the storm roll through. Emily's face lit with interest. I love that about you. Was that too much? He wondered. Perhaps. But something about this cave felt intimate, freeing. He moved closer to the opening. Shall we sit? She scooted near him so that their bodies could share warmth, and they watched the rain start to come down sideways as the wind whipped across the top of the mountain. Wow, I'm glad the opening hits at an angle. We'd be drenched. Thunder shook their cave, and Emily flinched. Sorry, I usually love storms. But this one is a little too close. Maybe that's it, but we're obviously protected in here. I don't know what's wrong with me. Tell me about Lily. The grateful smile she gave him made him want to see that expression aimed at him again, and often. She's an incredible human. Sounds like her mother. Her blush belied the hand she waved to brush off his compliment. She really is. Smart, creative. If I tell her no, she tries to find a way to make everyone happy and still get a yes. She's kind and so funny. You should have heard her the other day at dinner. She had my parents rolling. Tears Rhett listened to Emily talk and knew her passion had shifted. She was still a sharp businesswoman and an epic water skier, but she was a mother first. And something about that made him so inexplicably proud of her. He wanted to squeeze her, but instead he just shifted so that he could put his arm around her shoulders. Without thinking, he placed a kiss on the top of her head. She's lucky to have a mom like you. Well, I don't know about that. I definitely didn't choose well in the father department. He stiffened. Jackson. Yeah, he really just ended up being a jerk, plain and simple. You couldn't have known that going in. His actions are not a reflection on you. None of us guys liked him, but that was just jealousy. We were losing our Emily to some American upstart. Never mind that I'm technically American as well. Well, not to us. To us, you're just you. But anyway, I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. Haven't been. All this time. He squeezed her shoulder, as if the gesture could wipe out years of neglect. When I think of how this must have gone down. He swallowed a rather sharp lump. I just feel bad. Sorry, Em. She leaned her head back against his arm. He started out charming. He was so thoughtful, gave me things at just the right moments, helped me get through grad school. But as soon as we were married, he changed. She closed her eyes. Or maybe that's who he always had been. but his true colors showed. Tell me. Well, almost right away, he lost his job. But he said he'd look around for the right one when he was ready. In the meantime, I made enough for all of us. Then the game consoles came out, and the beer. I tried to make it work, to please him, for too long. And Lily? When she was born, he promised to change, and for a short, he was different. Attentive, helpful, in love with his girls, he said. But shortly after, he was back to his old ways, but more bitter. He was happy to game all day, and then blame me that he couldn't get a job. He turned angry. I began to leave Lily with my parents instead of him while I went to work, and I did most things at their house instead of working from home. I was uncomfortable around him. Rhett just listened and felt more and more sick. I'm sorry. When I told him I was leaving, he threw a fit, started throwing things. And my dad, who unbeknownst to me was waiting outside, stormed in and probably stopped him from really hurting me. We left together, and I never went back. Dad handled kicking him out of my home and clearing out his things. Then movers came and packed up my things. I stayed with my parents for a time and eventually bought our new place. When he turned threatening to me, and even to Lily, showing up at odd times, drinking, throwing out verbal threats, the courts agreed to a restraining order. We haven't heard a word from him for a couple years, and now this. Her face clouded with worry. I don't know what to do with this new request to be in her life. The answer is no. I think you are exactly right. Thank you. I guess it's just one more thing I'll have to deal with when I get home. But anyway, me and Lily are super happy there, and my parents are close by. You're really doing great, Em. And CEO, too? She sighed, and Rhett heard a wealth of fatigue in that quiet noise. I am, yes. Dad has been wanting to retire for about 5 years, but was waiting until I was ready. I'm not technically ready, so he still steps in as a consultant for anything I need. She stared out at the storm. An explosion of thunder shattered overhead, and she flinched. But honestly, Rhett? She turned to him, their faces inches apart. I came on this trip because I needed to get away. I don't want to be the CEO. I'm doing it for Dad, but I'm afraid I'll fail. Her eyes widened in such a tender vulnerability that his protective instincts kicked in even more. He ran a finger along her forehead, brushing hair out of her eyes. Then he let his finger trail down her cheek, just how he used to, enjoying the softness of her skin. Did he dare continue? She seemed to lean into him, just enough. So he cupped her face in his palm and ran a thumb along her mouth. Wish I could have borne some of that for you. He kissed her forehead. I do know one thing about you, Emily. He kissed her cheek, then her nose. She smiled. What's that? Her whisper sounded sultry, promising. He kissed her other cheek and gently lifted her chin. He resisted, searching the depths of her eyes, which he knew so well, hoping and waiting to know if she wanted to open up this door, one he'd so desperately yearned to open for all these years. Her eyes shone with confidence, hope. Then she closed her lids and parted her mouth. He waited no further, covering the softness of her lips with his own. The moment they touched, a decade's worth of longing ignited at once in a manner he was totally not prepared for. He was alone in a cave with the woman he loved. Loved. He pressed against her mouth, again and again, and she responded in kind, matching his growing intensity. He pulled her closer, shifting his body so they could be nearer, pulling, asking with every kiss. She melted into him, and when a tiny moan escaped her mouth, he almost pulled her down onto the cave floor. But another flash of lightning and an immediate crash of thunder reminded him where they were and that he had no idea where she wanted things to go. Best to take things slow, or at least slower than a steamy makeout session the first time he caught her alone. With one final nibble on her bottom lip, he pressed his forehead to hers. You are even more fun than I remember. She giggled. I'm out of practice. He shook his head. That may be, but doesn't mean anything to me. Seriously, Em, I may not recover. He winked. Ever. Oh, stop. You always were dramatic. Dramatic? I have never been dramatic. She laughed and leaned back against him. He ran his finger up and down her shoulder. So how do you feel about this, new development? Her body shook gently with silent amusement. It's a little early to ask something like that. Let's just live in the moment and enjoy it for a sec. So it's something to enjoy? She sighed. I just don't want to miss a chance to communicate. I think that's how I let us drift apart before. That's interesting. I thought it was because, all of a sudden, the crown was the most important thing in your life. What? Right. Like when you said, I have to put the crown first right now. You're not royal. I don't expect you to understand. But that's where I'm at. If you can't accept that, then we can't be. He whistled, astounded at his past self and her memory. Did I say that? You did, but I suppose it was merited. I was young. I wanted to be number one in your life. As you deserve to be. He leaned back against the cold stone of the cave and closed his eyes. I'm sorry I didn't tell you every day how much you meant to me. He swallowed. Honestly, I don't even know if new King Me understood how important you were. New King You, as opposed to old King You? Seasoned. Cured. Like a good beef. Yes, or old wine. Better with age. I hope that's true, because the younger you was pretty great. Give me a chance to prove it. He leaned forward, twisting sideways to be able to look into her eyes. She seemed wary as she searched his face, but her eyes changed, and he saw the trust he was looking for. I know I can be stubborn, focused completely on the most urgent task to the exclusion of all else, but right now, you are my most urgent task. She reached a hand up to the side of his face and pressed her lips to his once, slowly, agonizingly, slowly, then pulled away. No. The hurt in her eyes about killed him. No. We can't. What? Why not? She shook her head. Do we have to get into this? There are so many reasons, I'm not sure where to begin. Can't we just pretend everything's okay for a little longer? No. I'm falling for you here. The more I kiss you, the greater pain I'm causing myself. Fair enough. I suppose I'm doing the same thing. We can talk about it, but I'm not looking for counter-arguments. If you want to hear what's going on in my head, I'll tell you, but you have to just listen. Can you do that, just for today? He tried to argue, tried to shake his head, but he could tell she was serious, so he nodded. He held his breath. This was the most open he'd ever expected her to be. He'd be daft not to grab hold of the moment and listen. Too bad he couldn't take notes. Reason 1, Lily. She has a great thing with my parents, and I don't want to uproot her. He almost spoke, but he bit his tongue and resisted. Thank you for humoring me. Second thing, my work, and your crown, and the issues I care about, and your crown. Did I mention the crown? Because taking on a relationship with you, no matter how pleasant and private, also has a very public, very controlling side, and I lose myself in it. He nodded, not sure what to say. She was right. Whoever became the Queen of Idjura would just have to accept some of that. Most women he knew welcomed the opportunity. And then there's the press. I'm a private person. Most women he knew also welcomed the attention. But Emily had her own press to handle and was famous in her own right. And she had a daughter she would want to keep out of the public eye. Some of the reasons he himself had doubted their suitability came back to him, shrinking his hope that Emily could ever be in his life. Thank you for sharing your concerns. They're valid. A flash of hurt moved through her eyes, but before he could respond to it, she turned away and stood, stretching. I'm getting stiff. He peered outside. The rain was a trickle, but the clouds were green and dark. It still looks bad out there, but let's see if I can get some bars. The team just needs one ping on my location. He stepped outside and welcomed the cool wind. He hoped it would bring some clarity, wash some sense into his clouded brain, but it just made him yearn to be close to Em again. And she'd said no? number without even a second's thought. Hurt welled up inside him, and then his phone rang. Yes? Your Highness, are you well? Bart, his man over security, sounded unreasonably anxious. Yes, we're well. Do you have a ping on my location? Got you. Wow, near the top of Nepo? In a hole in the rock. If the lull holds, we'll come out. But if the storm picks back up, I'll be inside the cave. We'll come out when we hear the chopper. Excellent. And might I ask who else we are rescuing? Emily. The silence spoke much louder than any words. We should inform Kenworthy and the press team. I don't think we need to get PR involved. When it's Emily, PR must be involved. He suddenly felt tired, and he remembered more clearly why they'd allowed things to fizzle out between them. It had just been easier to let it die. Okay, hanging up. As long as the weather holds, we'll be there in 5 minutes. Got it. He hung up. When he turned, Emily was standing right behind him. Everything okay? Yes, they found us. Should be here any minute. She watched him, waiting perhaps for him to say why he felt all pinched inside when just moments ago he had been happy and hopeful. But he remained silent, and a great awkwardness settled over the both of them. Until she rested a hand on his arm. He covered her hand with his own. They stood on the ridge, the wind whipping around them, when Emily said, Quick, let's climb the ridge while we can. We didn't make it to the top. She raced past him and up the rocky incline. She was skipping the switchbacks, like they had as kids, but the way was treacherous in the rain. He couldn't blame her, though. Something about her open rebellion against the elements, against their safety, against even his own common sense, appealed to him. It called to him and made his heart excited and hopeful when moments before it had felt heavy and drab. He raced after her, staying close behind, trying not to throw caution entirely to the wind that whipped around them. The helicopter blades sounded in the distance. Emily yelped, Hurry, they're coming! And suddenly, he felt like he had when they were kids, trying to outsmart his security detail and get away without anyone knowing where they went. He raced after her, coming up behind and grabbing her hand as he ran at her side. We can do this! They scrambled over sharp edges, falling rock slipping beneath their feet, until the very top of the ridge was in view. The copter blades were directly behind them. Rhett knew if he turned around, he would see the frowning face of his head of security, so he didn't turn. They were both gasping for air, but they used their hands and feet to scramble the last 10 feet, then 5 feet. Then, at last, they stood teetering on the very highest ridge of Nepo. The sky was dark, but he knew the sun hid behind the storm clouds as it made its way down past the horizon. Rhett grabbed Emily's hand and held it high, both of their chests heaving for air. Victory! She shouted to the wind. Her hair whipped around her, her face glorious in achievement, and he knew in that moment, if the two of them worked together, they could accomplish anything. King Santoro, we're going to need you to wait for a secure pickup. The security team's loudspeaker blared at them, but they ignored the copter for a moment more. Look at everything, Emily said. So small. That's important. I know. Then the wind picked up as the helicopter moved closer, the pilot motioning for them to descend to a lower location. Reluctantly, they each took another look and then carefully moved back down the trail. The bird hovered next to them, and the doors opened. Military men held out their hands and pulled them in. The doors shut, and the helicopter moved away from the ridge. For a moment, everyone was quiet. Then Kenworthy, his PR man, handed him a set of earphones. We have a situation. Can we talk about it later? It depends on how you want to handle Emily. Can we get her a set of earphones too? Emily was handed her own pair, and then Kenworthy said, The press knows you've been up here, alone. They're already speculating on a renewal of old feelings. I don't see the problem. Emily shrugged. Let them speculate. It will go away. These things always do. While I respect your opinion, Miss Harrington, I feel that if we come out with a statement now, it will cut all speculation and allow us to move forward with more important things. Rhett felt Emily bristle, even though she wasn't sitting near him. So, Emily, I'm going to need you to say, "Excuse me, Kenworthy, but perhaps you don't remember. I don't need your words. I can speak for myself." Rhett bit back his groan. And that was another aspect of their relationship he'd sort of forgotten. She was vehemently opposed to Kenworthy, or anyone on his staff, feeding her words, controlling the message, as they liked to call it. "Please, Your Highness, if we are all on the same page with our statements to the press, we can alleviate the public's concern that you are actively considering." "You overstep, Kenworthy, in many ways." Emily smiled weakly at him and then turned away. "We'll let the press think what they want to think. No comments will be made except for the ever-useful phrase, 'no comment.'" He knew Kenworthy had more to say, and he was certain he'd hear more of it later. But for now, the conversation was at an end. They rode the rest of the way in silence, and when Emily was dropped off at a separate location and shuttled into her own royal limo, he let her go. Watching her car drive away as the helicopter rose up into the sky, he had no way of knowing where they stood, no better than he had when they'd started their climb up the mountain. Chapter 8. Emily woke up the next morning to about 200 notifications from her staff at work. She scrolled through most of the emails, glancing at the subject lines. What on earth? Finally, she found the original email from her assistant and clicked on the video link he'd included. New Queen of Ajira? Someone had caught video of them singing into pretend microphones, getting out of the Jeep, and stretching in an overly dramatic way before taking off together into the woods. Other emails had headlines of, "American Queen of Rugged Outdoors, store doesn't stop at retail." Emily and Rhett are back at it again? Once wasn't enough for the dynamic duo. She groaned and called her dad. "Hey, it's Her Royal Highness." "Oh, brother. Has it hit the news there?" "Not really. I'm getting calls from board members, but not the tabloids. Yet." "Why would they even care?" "He's a bit of a hot commodity, Em. He's called the elusive Bachelor King." "What?" "Truly. For years he was the talk. Who would he marry and make the queen?" "I don't remember any of this." "Well, you were a bit distracted back then." "Fair. So are you saying this might hit it big?" "Maybe. Either way, I've hired our security guys back. Mostly for Lily." Gratitude filled her. "Thanks, Dad. If we have to bring the tutors back in, do that too." Just like they had when Jackson was a threat and Emily was busy at work. "Will do. Look, don't you worry. We've got this. If you want to make things work with the king of a small country, we will support you." "Very funny, Dad. He really is great. But there are so many complications. We couldn't hang out for 4 hours yesterday without some of the old stuff coming back up. It's complicated running a country." She knew she sounded ridiculous. Of course it was complicated. "And I hate Kenworthy." "Is he still running the show?" Her dad humphed. "He's half the problem." She could almost see her dad pacing. "And what about Lily? Honey, have you thought this through? Because I see lots of red flags here, and Dad, I told him no." "Oh, you did?" "Now, are you sure about that, honey? Because he's a great man, complications or no. Sometimes it's worth all the trouble if you really love him." "What are you saying?" She felt her frustration rising. "Pick a side." "I don't know. I'm just saying, choose wisely and carefully." "Thanks, Dad." But he'd been no help. In about 30 seconds, he'd created doubt on both sides of her decision, if there even was a choice to be made. Who knew if Rhett wanted to pursue anything, or if Kenworthy would let him? She drafted an email to the board and to her staff. "Rhett and I are old friends. The press is trying to read into an afternoon spent hiking a mountain, but that's all it was. If anyone asks, your answer is, no comment. Not because I have anything to hide, but because I don't feel that my personal life is for public consumption." She felt good about that response. Then, she scrolled through the mess until she found an email actually relating to her job. The investments were coming in. Finance was thrilled. She felt more grateful than ever for her friends. Now, to put their funds to work on some of her new ideas. She was certain they could pick up the pieces and make something special out of Mountain Blue once again. After a couple hours of touching base back home, she packed her backpack. Today she was going to train with the water ski team. With a skip in her step, she made her way down to the car. But as soon as she walked outside, she was surrounded by press. "Why are you here? Do you hope to win a crown? Couldn't stay away. Some say we don't need Americans here, that you should keep your liberal ideas to yourself." The reporter's questions assaulted her from every side. "Wow," she muttered, and tried to push her way through to the limo. But the reporters wouldn't budge. "Please, I need to get through." "Just answer a few questions for us. How's Mountain Blue? How do you respond to questions about the solvency of your business?" "Mountain Blue is doing better than ever." Or would be as soon as she could get some of her new ideas going. "Now that you're siphoning off some of the royal treasury." "No, that's not." "Step aside." 3 men in black suits pushed their way through the crowd. The reporters parted. The men had the royal crest embroidered on the front of their suit jackets. The closest gestured for her to join them. "King Santoro sent us. He asked if you wouldn't mind coming with us." Her phone rang. Rhett. "Hey, thanks for saving me back there. Does that make me your knight in shining armor? Maybe shiny limo?" "I would have come, but it would have only drawn attention." She looked out the window. "So, you have me hostage. Where are you taking me?" "Hostage, huh? Does that mean you are at my beck and call for once?" "It appears so." "I'm meeting you at our smaller chalet on the coast." "The one with the lavender?" "Yes." "And the swing?" "Yes." His voice was quieter, and the distance between them suddenly felt more intimate as her last memory of the swing played through her mind, and the kiss that followed. "I'll meet you there in the helicopter, and then we can figure this out." "Sounds about right." "It's gonna be fine. But very inconvenient. I could just go home." She waited, hoping he didn't want her to go, but at the same time hoping she could. "Stay, for now. At least let's talk." "I'm already on my way. Don't have much of a choice." He laughed. "Exactly." She hung up and enjoyed the passing scenery. They were on a main road, but to the right and left were homes she didn't often get to see. Villages of small stucco homes, shops, and the occasional gas station. The ocean sparkled in the distance, and flowers filled every garden. They passed groves of oranges and lemons. Then, as they neared Lucia village, rolling hills of lavender filled her view. She rolled down the window and breathed deeply. The lavender fields reminded her of the unique, sweet smell of her grandmother, her bath salts, and most powerfully, the royal chalet in Lucia. Memories of Rhett flooded her mind. They'd spent some of their happiest times in this place. Trees, fishing spots, horses. She leaned forward to see out the front. Hopefully they could get out on the horses. Did the chalet still have them? The car slowed as they approached the front gate and cleared security. Then they continued down the long lane that led to the front of the house. "It's exactly how I remember it." "Have you been here before, miss?" "Oh, yes. I spent every summer of my younger years here." "Then welcome home, is it?" "It sure seems like it. And thank you." He pulled up to the house. Long, tall pillars lined the front, their white stones sparkling in the sunlight. And she welcomed the shade of the large oak tree in the yard. She wanted to run and fling her arms around its trunk, or climb to the top like she used to, but instead she nodded to it subtly and then turned to enter the house. Their housekeeper, Mrs. Halstead, would no longer be with them, but Emily noticed with delight that the woman to greet her at the front door had Mrs. Halstead's eyes. "Welcome to our home." She gestured for Emily to follow. "The king should be here soon and asked that we provide every comfort. Perhaps you'd care for some refreshment out on the veranda?" "I would like nothing more. Thank you." She followed the new Mrs. Halstead through the front rooms. The whole space was airy and cool and beautiful. Marble floors, exquisite furniture, flowy drapes, and a light breeze that smelled of lavender and the ocean. Emily had entered a new form of heaven. This is even lovelier than I remember. An older woman sat in one of the chairs on the veranda. You were too busy running about to appreciate the finer things back then, Em. Mrs. Halstead? Emily ran to the older woman and knelt at her feet. Can it be you after all these years? It is indeed, and you've met my daughter? I recognized your eyes. She turned back to her guide. Hello. The younger Mrs. Halstead smiled in response. Then his eyes lit up as she ran to him and tugged on his hand. Look who is here! Ah, you found our dear Mrs. Halstead. And she's reminded me of every naughty thing I've ever done. All your naughty behavior was limited to this house? Pretty much. He laughed, then tugged her hand, bringing her into a too-brief hug. Glad you're all right. Mrs. Halstead shot him a look. And why wouldn't she be all right? You're not endangering our child, are you? She's not quite a child any longer. I'm glad you noticed. She pointed her finger at Rhett, making Emily laugh. I have indeed noticed. He sat. Oh, and they've served your favorite cookies, he sighed. Is that a problem? Well, I do prefer the strawberry ones. And you're not the guest, are you? King or no? Mrs. Halstead winked. She waved over a servant with a plate of strawberry cookies. I knew it. Thank you. After snarfing down two in rapid succession, Rhett leaned back in his chair. You always did like Emily best. And why wouldn't I? Exactly what I say. Why indeed? The gaze he turned to Emily stole a bit of her breath. His intensity said way more than his words had admitted, and Emily wasn't sure what to do with the feelings that flooded through her. He reached for her hand, and when their fingers were laced together, Emily felt like everything in her life was finally fitting together. Shall we talk out here or in one of the conference rooms? All the warm, cozy feelings shifted, and Emily almost shivered. Kenworthy stood in the sliding glass doorway, the breeze lifting up just the few strands of hair at the front of his head. The conference room. No sense ruining this beautiful view, or dear Mrs. Halstead's peace of mind. Very funny. Emily stood. I'm certain there are items of national urgency that must be discussed. Is that what I'm here for? Kenworthy seems to think so. Rhett squeezed her fingers. But when we're finished, how about you and I ride out into the lavender fields? Oh, absolutely. Yes! They made their way back through the beautiful home into a room that belied the relaxing Mediterranean feel by being filled with the latest technology. Once they were seated, a screen lowered, with several people already up and live in a video call. Kenworthy took over the meeting. It's great to have you all here. With a new face in the media world to consider among us, it is important that we are all on the same page about her purpose and presence here in the country, and with the king. Emily tensed, but Rhett rubbed his thumb across the back of her hand. Perhaps he would make everything right. She just really didn't like Kenworthy. He'd disapproved of her from the beginning. To begin, Emily, is there anything in your past that we need to be made aware of? Pardon me. Skeletons in your closet? Issues or actions that might be viewed in a questionable light by the Crown? Emily sat up straighter. If by the Crown, you mean Rhett. I'm sorry. To be clear, the Crown in this instance would mean the royal family, the cabinet, and members of the royalty. I see. At any rate, the answer is no. And the man you married but then divorced, is he? Chapter 9. Rhett let Kenworthy have his time. Let him stomp around and preen his feathers. He watched Emily's face and knew she had about reached her limit. Kenworthy then pulled out a clipboard. Questions about the solvency of your company have come up on more than one news site. Would you share with us the financials? I will not. Kenworthy's eyebrows rose in a victorious surprise. And why is that? They are not the business of your staff. And another question has arisen from your search for investors and pitching of new programs for Mountain Blue. There are members of the press that wonder at the timing of your new, suddenly friendly, overture. Rhett shook his head and waved his hand. You don't need to answer that. But she should tell us more about her company. If you yourself invest, the press will go crazy. They'll accuse you of neglecting our poor and unemployed. If I support her, and I already pledged I would, I will use my private funds. Even if you do, people will know. Emily glared at him. Without having seen our financials, I'm surprised at the doubt in a company that has a long track record of success. The silence in the room felt thick, but Red ignored it. If that is all? Not quite. We still need to settle the question of what your relationship is with Emily, and how would you like it portrayed to the press? I thought we answered that sufficiently. The answer is, we have no comment at this time. But that will just feed the speculation. The speculation will die, unless you are feeding it. Emily stood, and Rhett knew they'd pushed her too far. Kenworthy held up his hand. We aren't quite finished yet. But Emily shook her head. I'm quite finished. We need to verse you on some of the matters of state and how your answers should be worded. Kenworthy, you overstep. You've always overstepped in this area. How can we answer questions about where we stand when we don't know ourselves? The Crown has one valuable commodity, privacy, and I guard mine. And she's right about our policies, as far as she understands them. She's entitled to her opinions, and I value the sharing. I'm going to need you to tone it back, or you will be dismissed. He stared, stony-faced, until he at last nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. When at last Rhett caught up with Emily, she had her phone to her ear and was headed to the stables. He gave her some space. By the way she carried herself and gestured wildly as she talked, he could tell she was not happy. But as she neared the stables, the huge tree came into view. The swing still hung from its lowest branch and floated in the breeze. She paused, turning to look at it. He joined her. She still talked into the phone. She smiled, her closed eyes crinkling at the edges, and then she lifted up on her toes to meet his lips. This time, his kisses were soft, brief, and filled with as much promise as he could manage. Her eyes were misty, welcoming. Chapter 10. Their ride through the lavender was what fairy tales were made of. The sweet smell rose up all around them. The rolling fields of purple and green, lined by deep, rich soil, filled every direction with a postcard image. Rhett rode at her side, and his carefree smile made it easy for her to imagine a future filled with days just like this one. But as she thought about it after, an important truth jabbed at her fantasy. Rhett would never be able to keep such a schedule. On their ride, they'd received no phone calls, no texts. She hadn't seen his phone out at all. And she could only guess at what kinds of sacrifices he was making so that they could be together undisturbed. She would do well to remember the busy years when they rarely saw each other, and if they did, they were rarely alone. It hadn't been entirely Rhett's fault. He'd been busy as the newly crowned king, and she had been busy preparing to take over her father's company. Thoughts of Mountain Blue reminded her she would have to spend a few hours today working with her new project managers. She sat out on the veranda, a delicious breeze blowing in over the fields. They'd had dinner with all the staff, everyone sharing their favorite stories of Emily and Rhett's summers at the house. If life were always so simple, she and Rhett would get on as perfectly as any couple could. He joined her, holding a book. As he sat, pressed up against her on the small settee, he opened the first page of the journal they'd left on the island. You brought it? Someone had to rescue this treasure from the elements. Are you sure it's worthy of rescue? Undoubtedly. He read the first paragraph out loud. The words of Emily and Rhett. Any other eyes reading these pages are sure to be burned out with a fire poker. To the point. I'm sure we had the best intentions. I don't know who you're remembering. He cleared his throat and turned a few more pages. Our statement of belief. 1. All living things matter. 2. God's earth is important. We should take care of it. 3. Family first and crown. 4. The dynamic duo can never be parted. Our spouses will just have to get used to it. Emily laughed. Our younger selves would be proud we're back together. I'm happy we're back together. He reached for her hand. Back together? She allowed him to take her fingers in his. Were you at the same PR meeting that I was? 'Cause that was a disaster. He ran his thumb along the back of her hand. There was room for improvement. But see, something like that would have sent you hightailing it 10 years ago. And today, here we are. Because we aren't planning on a forever. Aren't we? He sat forward. I think these things can be worked through. Kenworthy knows his place. Are you sure? Because I just saw a lot of him getting to say whatever he wanted. He raised his eyebrows. And me getting to say whatever I wanted. I'm sorry. I should really bite my tongue sometimes. I want you to express your opinions. You could do a lot of good for my country. I don't plan to be with you and not respect your mind. But change is hard for anyone, and these people don't know you like I do, so they might need a softer delivery. He winked. She knew he was being gentle and that he was right. Point taken. I will work on my diplomacy. Somehow, where you're involved, everything has an added level of emotion. That's not a bad thing. He wrapped an arm around her back, and she snuggled closer while the stars came out, one by one. The next day, far away from the house and the beautiful quiet moments with Rhett, she wished she could return. But instead, she walked the rest of the way down the boat docks to help her water ski team win the competition. As soon as she stood at the edge of the boat, the guys looked up. What seems to be the trouble, gentlemen? 5 guys lounged in their swim trunks, their skis lying on the bottom of the boat. Milo says he's lost his touch. He's not wrong. The guy can't clear more than 3 buoys. We've been at it all morning. Carlson seemed almost out of patience. Emily studied their faces. This wouldn't do. What do you want to do about it, Milo? I say we boot his sorry. Carlson, come on. He's our best skier. Was. Milo, want to show me what you've got? Milo sat up. Don't know how much good it'll do, but the rest of the fam has seen, so I guess you should too. We FaceTimed Dad. Even he said Milo's a disgrace. He used the word disgrace? Emily hopped in and wedged herself in between her brothers. Well, no. Carlson pulled the boat out into the bay and lined up at one end of the course. Milo, you're up. Again. Emily was worried about her brother's antics. Mountain Blue always won. If they stopped winning the water ski competition, it would affect their marketing and their consumers' confidence. They were cool, and they sold cool products. As soon as the guys stopped being cool, well, so would their products. Look, guys, I need your best here. What's going on? Carlson pulled the boat forward slowly, picking up the slack. Not sure. Everyone else is skiing fine. Maybe not champion quality, but fine. We could almost guarantee a win if Milo were on his game. Hit it! Milo's bored voice would have made Emily laugh if the stakes weren't so high. Carlson gunned the boat, and Milo popped out of the water. They raced for the buoy course, and Milo took the first 3 with ease. All right, Milo, you got this! Emily yelled back to him. He hit the 4th and the 5th, but as he rounded the ball, he dug in too deep, and his side slammed against the water. Milo sprayed to a stop while the boat turned around to go pick him up. When they got closer, he clutched his ear. Oh man, guys, something's wrong with my ear. What is it? Emily leaned over the edge. Worry and fear gripped her. Did you hear me, Em? Something is really wrong with my ear. He lifted his hand. Blood had pooled inside his palm. Oh my gosh! Emily began to feel a rising panic in her chest. Get in here quick! Who's calling 911? What is 911 in this country? Honestly, your boyfriend is the best 911 we have. She ignored the boyfriend comment and called Rhett. He answered on the first ring, something he'd never done in all their years of dating. Rhett! What is it? What's wrong? As soon as she explained the situation, Rhett promised that he'd have people waiting on shore to take Milo to the hospital. As they raced to the docks, Emily hung up. She was worried sick for her brother, her team, and her company. Rhett was true to his word, and they were taken immediately to a clean, well-organized, and top-of-the-line hospital. After about 2 hours, Rhett walked into the waiting room. Everyone stood up, but he waved them back down as he made his way to Emily. The doctor showed up at the same time. He's lucky. He damaged his eardrum, but it will heal, and it shouldn't affect his hearing. But no water, especially no water skiing, for 6 weeks. This is terrible. Emily looked away, not even embarrassed that she should be more relieved the damage wasn't permanent. Your team, Rhett said. She leaned up against his shoulder. You're the only one who would understand my concern without thinking my priorities are off. You could ski. She opened her mouth to decline, but she knew that was their only hope. You're right. His grin was too wide, his eyes too sparkly. Glad someone is happy about all this? I've been dying for the world to see you ski again. Now they're gonna finally know what Mountain Blue is all about. A lump grew in her throat as she listened to Rhett's sincere support. How had she ever come to deserve such respect from him? I love you, Rhett. He stepped closer. I suspect that just slipped out, and that you're thinking you meant it in the most brotherly way possible. But, when I say those same words to you, you'll know that not only do I mean it in every way, but that it is an emotion so powerful it commands my very breath. Her eyes widened, and the hand that rested on his arm gripped his shirt tighter. His gaze lingered on hers for long enough that she had no doubt of his sincerity, and then he turned to greet the other guys. He talked to Carlson as they waited for Milo to be discharged. At length, Milo was wheeled out, and they were all on their way back to the lake. Milo would sit out for the competition, and Em would be taking his spot. Rhett took the rest of the day off to train with them. At least, that's what he said. But Emily suspected he was there to watch her ski. They piled into the Mountain Blue boat one more time as Milo watched from shore. But before they could turn on the engine, Emily's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She waved for the guys to wait. Hello? Emily, it's good to hear your voice. She gasped, and an awful, cold feeling seeped into her chest. How did you get this number? Hey, relax. I'm just calling to talk about some issues with Lily. The school gave me your number so we could talk through their concerns. What issues? What are you talking about? There was no way the school had given out her number. You always were super emotional. Take some deep breaths. There's a girl. Emily had a strange feeling that other people were listening to at least his half of the conversation. What are you doing? They are concerned about our little girl. Said that some of her behavioral issues stem from having no father figure in her life. What are you talking about? My dad is her father figure, and he sees her every day. Who is concerned? Her alarm rose, as did her frustration with the obviously made-up garbage spewing from her ex's mouth. Well, judging by some of her behavior, they're thinking that perhaps that's not good enough, that her real father might need to step in. How are you talking to the school about her? That is strictly forbidden in our court order. Seriously, Em, you gotta calm down. You don't want another episode like the one you had. What episode? I have never had anything even loosely defined as an episode. Just remember one thing, Jackson. You aren't allowed within sight of her, and if you try anything, I'm chasing your butt back to jail. And here come the threats. Look, it was nice to talk to you too. We'll work on a civil way to help our little girl get what she needs. Bye now. Emily's heart pounded in anxious rage. How dare he? She clutched her hands together until they turned white. Carlson's lips were pressed into a tight line. Was that Jackson? She nodded, a sick fear growing in her gut. What is it? What's the matter? Rhett moved to sit at her side, visibly alarmed at her discomfort. Well, her ex is about the lowest cretin we've ever heard of, and it sounds like she just got a call from him. That about explains it. Emily fought for control over her emotions. She needed their help, and she needed to ask for it without bursting into tears. He's trying to get Lily. What? Carlson stood up, his nostrils flaring, like the courts are going to grant him any kind of custody. He's saying the school thinks she needs a father's influence. But how would he even know? Isn't he under court order to stay away? Yes, but we saw a picture of him at the school, talking to her. I think he's trying to get back into her life. My life. She fought a rising panic, fought hard, but her hands started shaking. Hey now, come here. Rhett pulled her closer and wrapped her in a hug so delicious she wished to escape inside forever. Does he have any recourse? I don't know. He sure acted like he did. He was trying to make it sound like I was unstable, that I was being unreasonable. His responses didn't make sense. It was as if he were putting on a show for someone. She could almost feel the men looking at each other over her head. I'm scared. Dad's not gonna let him get away with anything. Dad doesn't have much legal sway in decisions made on her behalf. That's all me, and I'm out of the country. She wiped her eyes. All of a sudden, I feel like I'm the bad guy here. He's doing this on purpose. You know how he is, Em. Carlson had always been her biggest supporter. Thank you. I hope it's nothing more than him trying to make me miserable. That would be my bet. The other guys looked on with caring concern. Thanks, guys. I got lucky when each of you became a part of my life. She rested a hand on Rhett's knee. You two, thank you for being here. I'm happy to help with whatever you need. Her phone rang again. Oh goodness, just wait a bit more. I have to take this too. She put the phone up to her ear. Hello? Her heads of staff and finance were both on the call. It's not good. Oh, wow. Not even a hello? I'm sorry to interrupt your romance with the king, but this could not wait. Not sure I love your tone, but talk to me. What's going on? Even with all your efforts, the projections have us failing. What? Why wouldn't the new push be successful? Well, we've had to use a large portion of our resources to cut back on some debt and limit those payments, and what's left is just not enough to keep us solvent. Even with the new investments for new projects, our new sponsorships, it's just not enough. Solvent? Are we going down? Her voice caught as she realized who was sitting next to her. Okay, give me the lowdown, and I'll call you back to discuss it in greater detail later. As he explained in the most succinct manner her company's downfall, it was as if her life passed before her eyes. Is this what happened when her father handed over a perfectly successful international company? In a matter of a few years, she had floundered her way into bankruptcy. She couldn't accept that. There was always a way to turn things around. She hung up and felt all eyes on her. We ready? She asked. Carlson looked between her and Rhett. You got it. Then Rhett shook his head. Talk to us, Em. What's going on? Emily needed to tell her brothers anyway, needed to talk to her father. What did it matter if Rhett heard? She had to stop him from investing in her company. So she told them all about how the 3 new ventures were still not making money, that their debt was so large that even with the new investors pouring money in for new projects, the projections said they wouldn't be able to make it. It hurt her to speak through the lump in her throat, but she was relieved her brothers could hear what was going on. As the boat took off across the water, Rhett leaned closer. I'll give you whatever you need. I haven't made my investment yet. She swallowed down her hope. She couldn't let him take this hit. You cannot do that. The press would eat you alive. I don't think anything can save us now. You underestimate the power of my portfolio. While that may be true, she couldn't let Rhett use his capital to save her sinking ship. She shook her head. Well, it's not going to help things if Mountain Blue loses the water ski cup for the first time ever. Let's see what we can do, shall we? 2 of her brothers shared looks, and she knew the conversation was far from over, but she needed to clear her head before facing any more terrible news. Chapter 11. Rhett was just about to sign the papers, buying a huge sponsorship of Mountain Blue, when Kenworthy came rushing into his office. Kenworthy, I need you to knock. Oh yes, of course, my apologies, but this could not wait. What is it? Kenworthy looked gleefully ready to share something. Mountain Blue. We dodged the largest mistake of our lives by delaying sinking money into that hole. The dark tendrils of doubt entangled his hope. What do you mean? It's hit the news everywhere, just in the last hour. Even with a last-minute investor, the company's going under. They declared bankruptcy just a few minutes ago. What? He picked up his phone, dialing Carlson. Kenworthy kept talking, but Rhett no longer heard him. When Carlson's phone sent him to voicemail, he stood. Thank you, Kenworthy, but I'm going to need some time. His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing and closed the door as he left. They couldn't just declare bankruptcy without telling him. He had been about to sign on. He'd felt like part of the team and had looked forward to helping. But all the whiny voices in his head meant nothing. He needed answers. He might not be out a substantial amount of money, but he almost had been. When Carlson's phone didn't pick up the second time, he called M. Hello! Her voice sounded small, and instead of appealing to his sympathies, it just made him angry. Why M? Why did you let things get so bad before reaching out? What are you talking about? The silence on the other end felt sharp, uncomfortable. He wanted it to end, and he wanted some answers. I would have never involved you. That much is clear. You've kept me out long enough for me to know that for sure. Hey, wait, that's not fair. It's perfectly fair, but that's for another day. Carlson won't answer his phone, or I'd just deal with him. Is there any hope for Mountain Blue, or are you bowing out? Let me call you back on that. Fine. But he still couldn't find it in him to feel sorry for her. He was angry, and the red-hot emotion grew the more he learned about her situation. She'd all but tricked them with her promises of success, as though Mountain Blue were as good an investment as ever. He didn't blame her, but then again, he did. She'd used friendships, abused their trust. His trust, and the other prince's. And she'd done it right in the middle of his attempt to found the Prince Society, which was supposed to improve the relationships between the royalty of the Mediterranean. Kenworthy came barreling into his office again, but at one look from Rhett, he turned on his heels and knocked. Come in. When he stopped in front of Rhett's desk, Rhett knew what he was going to say. You invested in this fiasco? He handed Rhett a well-read newspaper article. King duped by pretty face, trusts old flame and loses millions. No, I did not. I was talking with them, but no papers were signed. Your response to this garbage? No comment. Kenworthy reached for a folded paper in his suit jacket. Perhaps you will be able to comment on this. Your Majesty, she knew. Pardon? She has known for a long time that Mountain Blue was going down. She knew while she was pitching all the princes at your quarterly meeting, and she certainly knew when you were talking to them about investing. I'm sure she did. She was trying to save it, doing everything she could. Was she? Or was she just ensuring a nice nest egg for her family? Thank you for your obvious interest in this matter, but it clearly falls outside your purview. I'm going to ask you to do something within your job description and call a press conference. Pardon? His mouth dropped open. Call a press conference. You may close the door on your way out. But what are you going to say? Should we review the message? His voice died off as Rhett deepened his frown. If you want to pass your speech through PR, he shook his head. Okay, I'll just leave you to that and get it all arranged. An hour later, Rhett made his way to the press room at the palace. He was determined to be transparent and honest. He trusted his citizens to be reasonable. They just liked to understand, to know what was going on. His phone rang. Emily. Hello? Hey, so it's as bad as you think. We're going under, probably forever. I was desperate when I pitched for help, but I really thought I could save Mountain Blue. I know. I'm on the plane, going home. That I didn't know. A cold numbness settled over him. So I guess that's it? I gotta figure some things out. As you can imagine, everything's in shambles, and I owe so many people. I've already started the transfer of funds to pay the guys back. Carlson should have never involved you. I knew what I was doing. No, I should have been more transparent. But anyway, I've got to figure out some things. Jackson is still causing trouble. It's bigger even than this. There was a long silence. Rhett neared the press room door, where Kenworthy was waiting for him. I gotta run. Let's talk about this more. Don't be silent. Okay, you either. Thank you, Rhett, for trying. You're welcome. I'll call you later. Bye. Rhett ignored Kenworthy and every other staff member who tried to talk to him on his way in. He walked straight to the microphone, turned to face a room full of press, some of whom he'd known his whole life, and smiled. Greetings. Chapter 12. Emily watched the man she loved, had always loved, tell his country that no royal funds were used to invest in her failing company. She tried not to feel hurt as he subtly distanced his country from her business. She, of course, would have done the same, so she completely understood, and a part of her was happy he wouldn't take a hit for the kindness he'd offered. She watched as he expressed confidence in his fellow citizens, how he was fully transparent about his offer to help Emily. My personal life, my relationships, even who I eventually marry, are purely private matters. I understand how it might be of interest to some, but the answer to questions on those topics will almost always be no comment. In this one instance, however, I will make an exception. Once, a long time ago, I was lucky enough to know a young girl named Emily. She and I were the best of friends, and somehow, no matter what we did, when I was with Emily, I felt stronger. Then she got busy, and I got busy, and we both went our separate ways. She married, had a beautiful daughter, and escaped a hurtful husband. She is one of the most successful women in the world, is talked about in most elevated business circles, and runs what was once the most lucrative sports equipment company out there. Things have been tough for her, and when she most desperately needed help, she came here, to her friends from childhood, to the people she trusts most. And what did we do? We did whatever we could to help. I was willing, but my offer came too late. And now Mountain Blue will be no more. Emily wiped tears from her eyes. But I want to make one thing clear. No royal funds were used to try to rescue my friend. And the other thing I want to make clear, I will not entertain speculation about what she means to me. Some relationships are too important to be lowered by tabloid supposition. If you must debase yourselves in that manner, do not expect a response from me or her. He nodded and held his hands out. And finally, as I look around the world, as I view the other countries of the Mediterranean, I am proud of the role Adjara plays as a leader in our modern societies. Thank you, my dear citizens. Then she switched off the TV. Emily leaned her head back for an hour, thinking about all he had said, and she wondered if she'd ever see him again, if she'd ever again feel the warmth of his praise. Even though he'd spoken warmly about her in public and supported her like a true friend would, she'd seen the coldness in his eyes, heard the disappointment in his voice, and knew she'd let him down. He likely thought she'd totally used him and abused their friendship. They eventually landed. She dragged her feet out of the car that had picked her up at the airport. As she headed down her sidewalk to her front door, she was so happy to be home, to at last fall into bed and wake up in the morning and hold her daughter. Jackson stepped out from the bushes and grabbed her wrist. The air around him reeked of whiskey. Let go of me. Not until we have a little talk. I have nothing to say to you. Good. Then maybe you'll shut your trap and listen for once. How dare you! She twisted and tried to wrench her hand out of his grasp, but he shook her in response, and her teeth rattled. Stop! I want back into my baby girl's life. She shook with rage and fear, but she held her tongue. Why? I just do. So we're gonna make that happen? Or I'm gonna start telling people how you really are. You can tell the truth about me anytime you want. I don't think you're gonna like it if the real truth gets out. She looked around, certain he was again putting on some kind of show. I'm serious. I have nothing to hide. Emily? Is that you? The front door opened, and as soon as her father saw Jackson, he barreled out and punched him in the face. In his inebriated state, Jackson fell to the sidewalk and Emily and her father rushed inside and closed the door. With shaking hands, Emily called the police to report Jackson was on their property and that he'd threatened her. Then she fell into her father's arms. What does he want? I can't figure it out. He's never really cared for Lily, never shown an ounce of interest. But if you have to move, we'll help, whatever it takes. Where's the security team? It seemed quiet, so I sent them home. At the look she gave him, he lifted the phone to his ear and arranged for them to return. I want someone watching the entrances to the house at all times. He hung up, then he shook his head. The last we heard, Jackson left town. It's been quiet. He called me, acting weird, as though I'm the problem. He's made threats. I'm scared. We'll get this figured out and get a tighter detail. And you already reported him, so that's all you can do for tonight. I gotta get to bed, Dad. I can't hardly think. Tomorrow let's talk about this in Mountain Blue. You get some rest, love. I can't wait to see Lily's face tomorrow when she sees you. That brought a very tired smile to her face. She needed her baby girl. As she crept along the hallway, she peeked into Lily's room. Just her nose peeked out of the blankets. The innocence of her serene forehead while she slept brought a smile of relief to Emily's face. Everything was going to be just fine. How could it not be with a sweet child like Lily in the world? Emily barely washed her face and brushed her teeth before she fell into bed. The last thing she did before drifting off was check for any communication from Rhett. None. She told herself he would call tomorrow. He couldn't stay mad forever. But a part of her thought he just might. The last time they drifted apart, 10 years went by before either of them had reached out. Chapter 13. A few weeks went by with no further run-ins with Jackson. Emily started to breathe easier. The school assured Emily that they'd had no communication with Jackson at all, that Lily was doing fabulously, and that they would keep a tighter watch where she was concerned, especially after Emily had shown them the satellite image of Emily talking to her father. They were shocked he had been there, and no one had known. Rhett hadn't reached out at all, so Emily let him have his space. She had been busy liquidating some of her own personal investments. Her father thought it a good idea to pull in her brothers and for the whole family to brainstorm what the next step would be for Mountain Blue. That meeting would take place in a couple days. Things were mostly looking up. The men they had monitoring Jackson had reported he'd gone missing again. She didn't like the insecurity of not knowing where Jackson was, and she didn't like worrying about him hurting her daughter. But they'd done all they could for now. Security was at her school, and they had her home under constant surveillance. The one true thorn in her new garden of hope was Rhett. She missed him. Now that she'd had him back in her life, she wanted him back for good. What had kept them apart to begin with? She couldn't even remember. Why hadn't she planned to just stay by his side and never leave? Now that she'd paid everyone back all the money they'd lost, and he'd cleared up the press problems in his country, maybe they would have a chance, if he'd see it that way. But so far, the silence on his end told an entirely different story. She came down the stairs just as the doorbell rang. Someone in her dry cleaner's white uniform stood outside. They must be there to pick up her laundry. She grabbed the bag and opened the door, and Jackson's menacing, mocking grimace met her. She lifted her hand to get the security team's attention, but Jackson rushed into the house and slammed the door behind him. She tried to slow her breathing. "Get out, now, number. We're gonna sign some new papers before I go." "What papers?" "What are you talking about?" "These." He handed her a folder. She sifted through paperwork that would revoke his restraining order and grant him partial custody of Lily. "No, you're insane. You can't take my daughter from me. She was never yours. You hurt her. I pray every day she doesn't remember you." "Oh, she remembers me. She promised never to try to make me mad again." "What did you do?" She rushed at him in a rage, but he lifted his arms and easily blocked her seemingly weak punches. "Leave her alone, you sick pig. She needs a father in her life." "Why are you suddenly interested in her?" "I've always been interested. I just finally got the courage. If you're gonna steal her away to another country, to live in a castle or whatever, I want some part of that too. So you think you would have some kind of claim on her royalty? His eyes widened, like he'd given away a secret. Number just that she'll be far, and I won't get to see her. You can't see her anyway. I have a restraining order out against you. And if you touch her again, if she has to worry about upsetting you even one more time, I'm going to help you understand what it means to worry about upsetting someone. I am so tired of you, of the hold you had over us. You don't deserve to be in my life or Lily's, and it's pretty clear the courts and the police agree. She reached for her phone to call 911, but he snatched it from her hand faster than she could pull it out. I see you won't listen to reason. Let's do this the harder way. He snatched the papers back and held them up. I need these signed before I leave here. And I'm not going to sign them. He grabbed her wrist and dragged her down the hall to the kitchen table. I have something that might change your mind. He threw her down on a kitchen chair. She stood right back up, but he pulled out a gun and wiggled it at her. She sat again, slowly. This won't hold up in court. A signature under gunpoint isn't legally binding. It will be legal enough to get temporary custody, and that's all I need, she gasped. Just leave us alone. I will, if I get what I want. Emily searched her mind for something, anything, she could do to get rid of Jackson. But with him standing over her, holding a gun too close to her face, she had no ideas. The best thought she had was to stall. Where have you been, Jackson? We've heard nothing for years, and then all of a sudden you just pop up? I've been busy. He pulled the paperwork back out and flattened the wrinkles. Then he placed it in front of Emily. He patted his pockets, then looked all around them. Pen. Get yourself a pen. She stood. No, change my mind. Tell me where I can find a pen in the kitchen. I've been gone, so I don't know for sure. He backed up and started opening drawers, running his hand through them without looking, his eyes always on Emily. She waited for her chance. Then, when he made his way over to the junk drawer, he looked down for a moment, and she raced out of the kitchen, heading for the front door. She rounded the corner, fleeing through the living room. Jackson tripped on something behind her, but he was getting closer. She could smell his rancid sweat. She reached for the doorknob, but he grabbed her around the waist and pulled her away, her legs and arms kicking and swinging in the air. He'd needed both hands to stop her, so the gun wasn't pointing at her anymore. She elbowed his gut, and he grunted. Then she reached back to scratch at his face, aiming for his eyes, everything they'd taught in her self-defense classes. But she just wasn't very strong. He barely flinched when she pounded into him, and he dodged her hands and grabbed her wrists so that she couldn't reach his eyes. But she was not giving up. The house phone rang, and Rhett's number was announced over the intercom. Hello, she called out. Maybe their smart speaker would hear her from the front of the house. The phone rang again. Hello, she shouted. Be quiet. But the ringing stopped, and a voice, the best voice in the world, said, Emily! Rhett! She shrieked. Emily, what is it? Emily, are you there? Answer me. But Jackson had his hand firmly over her mouth and was leading her toward the back door. She kicked like crazy, trying to scream through his hand. But Rhett had gone silent. Then the door crashed open, and 2 security men from out front rushed Jackson. He whipped his gun out and held it at her head. Don't move! Emily and I are leaving together. If you give me trouble, I shoot. The guys held up their hands. Okay, don't shoot. It doesn't have to get to that. Don't talk, just back away. The security guards kept their hands in the air and slowly backed up to the front door. Movement caught her eye out the window. She wasn't sure who or what was out there, but she placed a whole lot of hope on that one flash of movement. Jackson dragged her toward the door to the garage. What kind of car you got in there? I don't know. It works. He yanked her hair. Don't be getting sassy with me. Are the keys out there? Yes. He moved toward the garage, both his hands occupied with keeping her restrained and holding his firearm. The gun felt cold and paralyzing against her head. Ouch! You're hurting me. We're alone. Do you really think the gun is necessary? You gonna cooperate? Yes. If I sign, then you'll leave? I can't leave without you now. Your security showed up, didn't it? The more Emily considered her options, the more hopeless she felt. Rhett circled the house, waiting for his moment to slip inside. Jackson had looked crazed, under the influence of something, and desperate enough to kill someone. He'd called in backup, but as soon as Jackson put a gun to Emily's head, he'd called them off. He crept to the garage and slipped in through a side door. He moved into position and waited. Within a few moments, the door to the house opened, and a defeated-looking Emily was dragged into the garage. "Put the gun away," she said. "I'm walking. We're going." Jackson considered her for a moment. Then he shook his head as he relaxed his arm, the gun moving away from Emily's head. Rhett leapt out from his hiding spot. At the same moment, Emily reached for a hammer on the workbench. They came at Jackson from both sides. Emily swung at him first, the hammer cracking into the side of his head. Rhett swung at his face and was able to land a punch before he slipped to the ground. Emily nearly collapsed herself. She reached out a steadying hand to grip the workbench. Rhett ran to her and lifted her into his arms. He ran back into the house, cradling her all the way to the front room, where he placed her on the couch. Then he called in the security. The house was filled with running feet, but Rhett focused on Emily. With his hands on either side of her face, he studied her. She looked tired. "Are you okay?" She started to nod, and then shook her head, her lips trembling. "No." She leaned forward and pressed her face into his shirt and cried. And he held her. Someone showed him Emily's father on the phone, and he nodded. But he said nothing and just held his best friend, the woman he loved, the one he'd promised to always stay a part of her life. After a moment, her crying eased and the men cleared out. Jackson had been taken out through the garage. They were sitting alone in a quiet house. He held her in silence until he heard a quiet sigh. "Nice place," he said. She laughed. A small little chuckle. He joined in, and soon they were both laughing together. Wiping her eyes, she leaned back. "How did you get here?" "I wanted to see you." "You can do that now, just leave Ajira." "I am the king." "But—" "I know. Last time, I was also the king. But I've made some decisions, and one is that some things are more important than my country or my crown." "What?" Her eyes widened, and she looked as though she might disagree with him. "You, for example." She swallowed, considering him as her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to say. Does this mean you forgive me?" "Forgive you? Of course. You were just doing everything you could to save your family legacy." "Yes, but I am sorry I wasn't more upfront about it. I hadn't seen you, or any of the guys, in years. But once I realized everyone was still the same, that our friendship was still strong, and that you and I were, well, whatever we are, I should have spoken up." "Let's not worry about that now. Jackson is gone. Lily is safe at school. Your parents have been notified, so now we just need to decide what you need most, food or a hot bath." "What do I need most?" Her expression took on a sly slant. "You are here." She rested a hand on the side of his face and sat up on her knees in front of him. "And the house is empty." "Oh, is it?" She nodded and inched closer. "Then we'd best make use of this opportunity." He wrapped his arms around her and pulled her closer. Cradling her in his lap on the couch, he studied her face. "I feel like the most important thing in my life is right here in front of me, and at an elementary school nearby." Her eyes welled with tears again. "Oh, no more tears. I can't see you in tears." He kissed away the moisture from each eye. "Even if they're happy tears?" "I can't always tell the difference." She smiled, and he thought the sun had entered the room. "I lived my life without you for all these years, wishing you were still a part of it. Then I thought about having to do so again." He shook his head. "I love you, Em. I've loved you for a long time. You were my very best friend, and then my teenage crush, then my college love, and now as the only love of my life, the woman who holds my happiness and my heart in her hands. I love you." She sat forward so that their faces were inches apart. "I love you too, Rhett. You may be my best friend, but you're so—" She pressed her lips to his, and energy zinged through him. "So much more." Then she wrapped her hands around his neck, and he dipped her again across his lap, his mouth chasing hers until he covered her lips and became lost to their sweetness. Chapter 14. Lily came home from school, and as soon as she saw Rhett, she ran toward him shouting, "Uncle Rhett!" He picked her up and swung her around. "Now that's the welcome a man should get every day." The gaze he gave Emily melted her on the spot. Could all this really be happening? The front door opened again, and even though Emily couldn't help a small gasp of fear, her smile returned quickly as her parents walked in. They gathered around the kitchen table, eating an after-school snack with Emily as they talked about what to do next. Rhett was all about saving Mountain Blue. He even had some awesome ideas. But Emily and her father both shook their heads. Her father smiled and rested a hand on Rhett's shoulder. "I appreciate all you're trying to do, but Mountain Blue has had her run. She's been good to us, and I think we can move on to something else." Rhett turned to Emily, his eyes full of concern. "Do you feel the same? We could still give this a go. I think there's lots of life left in the company. The name is known all over the world." A part of her grasped onto the lifeline that Rhett was throwing her, but the rest of her wanted to turn the page on that chapter and move on to something new. She shook her head. Rhett toyed with a fork for a moment, then cleared his throat. "I would love to see you come to Ijira. Perhaps there's something to build there?" Mr. Harrington's eyes sparkled. "Exactly my thoughts. We created Mountain Blue while living on the Mediterranean. I think it's time to go home." Every eye turned to Lily, who was building a tower of cookies on her napkin. She noticed the attention. "Do you want a cookie?" "No, baby. But I was just wondering if you'd want to go see where Uncle Rhett lives." Her eyes widened. "Is it a castle?" "Sort of. More like a palace." Her eyes widened, and then a grin grew on her face. "Will they have to call me princess?" Rhett leaned back and laughed, obviously delighted. "They just might, little darling." "We have a house there too," Emily said. "And I'm thinking about living there for a while. With you and Grandma and Grandpa. And Uncle Rhett." The smile he gave her melted her heart again. "Yes, and Uncle Rhett." Lily thought about it for a moment. "Can we go tomorrow?" Emily exhaled, relieved. "Yes, baby, we can leave tomorrow. We'll get someone to pack up your things, but you and I and Rhett can fly in the airplane tomorrow." She jumped up from her chair and raced off, calling over her shoulder, "I'll go pack my favorite stuffed animals." Then she was out of sight. "She's such a remarkable little girl." Rhett shook his head. "So much like you. That's the age I met you, isn't it?" He looked to Emily's father. He nodded. "Your mom and I will follow a bit later. And Rhett, Emily, I'm so pleased you finally found each other again." Rhett reached for her hand, and Emily didn't think she could be happier. Epilogue. Lily came running out of the family wing of the palace. "Daddy!" Her voice could be heard from several hallways over. Her feet pattered as she raced toward them, dodging servants and bursting into her mother's office. "Why didn't you tell me we had a unicorn?" She held up a rumpled, scratched up, and slightly bent stuffed animal. "Ah, I see you found Pointy." Rhett stood and picked Lily up, kissing her on the top of her head. "That's a very special unicorn. Be good to her, and your wishes just might come true." "Whoa, a magical unicorn." Lily ran off again, and Rhett turned to Emily. "I will never ever get used to hearing her say Daddy. Thrills me every time." Emily stood and wrapped her arms around his middle. "I will never get used to it either." She tipped her head up to look into his face. "I love you, Rhett." He studied her for a moment, his eyes full of the same caring she'd seen all the years she'd known him. She knew marrying him was the best thing she could have done. He toyed with her hair, and then he said, I love you too. Keep reading for chapter 1 of the next Royal Billionaire book. Hiding Out with a Royal Billionaire